Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Moving day. A chance to start fresh in a new place. New opportunities, new community, new home. Home. Not just a house. To Eric Sherman, this was a place he could finally call home. No ex-wives to hound him for alimony. No disapproving parents to question his absence of faith and atheist lifestyle. No bitchy neighbors threatening to call the authorities about his over-the-top Halloween displays. No, this house was different. For one, it was in a more rural and secluded county. There was no HOA to worry about. His nearest neighbor was almost half a mile away. Before Eric had moved in, he made it a point to go and meet him and ask some questions about the community. "So how long have you lived around here, Mr. Holt?" Eric asked.
"Oh, hell," the old man began. "Call me Henry. Everyone else around these parts does."
Henry took a long drag from his cigarette.
"But to answer your question, been here my whole life. I inherited the house and little farm from my pa after he passed in 75.
Henry extended what was left of his cigarette in a small glass ashtray before slipping another one out of its wrinkled pack. "You grow anything on the farm?" Eric asked. Henry gestured over his shoulder, swirling smoke through the air with his newly lit cigarette.
"Just some squash and the like. In the fall I grow pumpkins and let the city folk come and pick 'em for Halloween. You like Halloween, son?"
Eric's eyes lit up. Ever since he was a boy, Halloween had been his favorite holiday. He enjoyed being scared and using his extensive collection of decorations and props to scare others. "Yes, sir, I do. At my last house, my ex-wife and I put up quite a display. Sometimes we would even make a little haunted walkthrough in our yard. Some of the neighbors said our displays were too intense and made too much noise." Henry chuckled and took another long drag.
"Well," Henry began, "you don't have to worry about that around here. I'm your closest neighbor, and I love all that spooky shit. Noise won't be a problem neither. My hearing's been going these past few years, so if you want to rile up the folk that come out this way for pumpkins and trick-or-treating, I'd say have at it."
The two men chatted for a few more hours. Eric told Henry about some of his more gruesome Halloween displays, and Henry told Eric about which shops were closest and had the best prices. "Well, Henry," Eric said as he shook the old man's hand, "I look forward to living up the road from you."
"Same here, son," Henry replied. "Treat that old house good. Like all old things, handle her with care, and she'll treat you right."
A week later, Eric was finishing unloading the boxes from the moving truck and into the old country house. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, gazed up at his new home, and let out a satisfied, "Home." The farmhouse was huge, much bigger than Eric's last house, and more than enough for a bachelor and his dog, a border collie named Cerise. Eric wasn't bothered by the extra space. More room to store props and decorate with macabre knickknacks. Horror and grotesquities were not reserved solely for Halloween. Eric enjoyed adorning his shelves, mantels, and countertops with skulls, bones, old crumbling books, and other bizarre curios he acquired over the years. As he was carrying the last of the Halloween boxes up to the attic, Eric stumbled, sending the box crashing to the floor. He frantically pulled open the cardboard flaps and sighed with relief. Nothing had broken. He then turned to see what had caused him to lose his footing. There, at the base of the attic steps, was a noticeably loose floorboard. Eric grabbed a hammer, nails, and a flashlight from his toolbox and made his way back to the attic doorway. He clicked the flashlight on to find the best place to hammer the board down when he noticed something tucked away just under the loose board. Using the claw end of the hammer, Eric pried the other nails out of the floorboard. The space beneath the floor had an old, musty smell, the kind of odor one expects to smell in a second-hand shop or antique store. As the beam from his flashlight scanned the dust-caked alcove, Eric finally saw what had caught his eye. Before him sat a small antique black trunk. Eric lifted the box from its hiding place and wiped the dust from it with his shirt sleeve. The box was made of a very sturdy wood that had been painted black by its creator. The lid was slightly domed and secured with a large antique lock. Emblazoned across the front of the lid were letters that Eric instantly recognized as Hebrew. Eric rubbed his stubbled chin as he tried to make out the letters. He had taken Hebrew lessons as a child, but hadn't studied or read anything in the language since his bar mitzvah. Now, in his late 30s, the letters seemed alien to him. He thought about calling his mother and asking her what it said, but their relationship had been rocky ever since she told him she could not accept that he had abandoned his faith. At any rate, Eric knew he had to see what was inside. He went back to his toolbox and returned once again, this time with a pair of bolt cutters. Eric placed the cutters on the lock, and with one firm squeeze, the lock snapped in half. He removed the remnants of the broken lock from the latch, and without warning, the lid flew open with a horrible screech. Eric jumped back from the sudden noise. After taking several deep breaths, he clutched his chest and laughed a bit to himself. He walked back over to the now open trunk and peered inside. Eric's eyes lit up as they had at Henry's when he mentioned Halloween. Inside were an assortment of bizarre trinkets, a small jar filled with teeth, 5 rusted nails fastened together with twine, a desiccated frog, a small jar of what looked to be rock salt. But among the various oddities, the most impressive was an antique gesture marionette. The puppet glared up at Eric with lifeless blue eyes and a sardonic grin that was thinly framed by a pair of blood-red lips. Eric reached toward the limp figure to inspect it, when with a loud wooden snap, its mouth popped open.
Oh, shit!
Eric gasped as he recoiled his hand from the marionette. His heart began racing, and the sound of pumping blood filled his ears. From the downstairs living room, Cerise had begun to bark.
"It's all right, girl,"
Eric shouted.
"Daddy was just being a wuss."
As courage crept its way back into Eric's body, he noticed a small piece of paper in the puppet's mouth. He slipped the paper out of the doll's open maw and found the same Hebrew lettering on it. Must be your name, Eric wondered aloud. With that, he placed everything back into the trunk and decided he would ask Henry if he knew anything about it tomorrow morning. Eric sat on Henry's porch as the blazing autumn sun beat down on them. Though it was still early in the morning, the temperature had already reached an uncomfortable 91 degrees. This heat and the accompanying humidity were not uncommon for the area, but it was more than Eric was used to. Sweat drops had already formed on Eric's forehead, and his clothes began to cling to his body with sweat. The mysterious trunk sat on a small patio table in between the two men. "Any idea what it could be?" Eric asked Henry as the two studied the box and its contents.
"Looks like a lot of weird shit,"
Henry replied.
"Hell, son, thought you was into all that spooky stuff."
Eric chuckled. Henry had a good point. This was the exact type of thing Eric would go out of his way to find at antique stores and estate sales. Eric was about to reply when Henry gestured to the inscription on the trunk.
"Ain't those them Jewish letters?"
Henry asked. Eric nodded as he took a sip of water from his bottle. "Yeah," Eric replied. "Hebrew. Was the previous owner Jewish?" Henry let out a deep sigh and shook his head solemnly.
"Now, my pa and I always had our suspicions about Kurtz," Henry began. "The old feller that lived in that house before you. Mean old bastard. thick German accent. Bought the place you was living in around 1950. Pa always said to keep away from 'em. Told me, only good Nazi is a dead Nazi. That old bastard must have stole this off some poor Jewish fella thinking it'd be valuable someday.
Eric looked at Henry with a steady gaze. He swallowed the lump that had built up in his throat. My family is Jewish, Henry. They escaped the Nazis in Poland and fled to America when the war was over. Henry placed a hand on Eric's shoulder and gave a reassuring smile.
Son, I know it might seem strange living in that place knowing what you know now, but maybe this is restitution of sorts. That old prick is dead and buried. Now you live in his house and you've reclaimed something that belonged to your kin. Yes, sir, this is just your people reclaiming what is rightfully theirs.
Eric forced a smile and looked down at the box. The puppet met his gaze with its own cruel smile. Eric turned back to Henry. But why wouldn't the realtor have said something about this? Henry let out a laugh.
Boy, even if they knew the old fool's history, do you really think that would be something they'd advertise?
Henry replied. Eric knew he was right. No sane person would stop on a real estate listing that read, Rural Farmhouse, Country Living, Former Fascist Occupant. Eric thanked Henry for his time, gathered up the trunk and its inhabitants, and started to walk down the dirt road that led to his house. Henry called after Eric.
What you gonna do with that creepy puppet?
Eric turned and replied, Well, Halloween is in a couple of weeks. I think he'll look pretty good on my mantle. Before long, Eric had started putting up his Halloween display. He had spent years purchasing and collecting the most grotesque and gory pieces he could find. His once scenic front yard was now an abattoir littered with limbs and heads, festooned with intestines and manned by blood-soaked animatronic clowns. Henry came by a few times a week to see how the display was coming along. Each time he would ask Eric if it was finished, and each time Eric would tell him there was always room for more. Inside, the farmhouse was more tame by comparison, but still had its fair share of horror. Actual skulls and bones Eric had acquired from various collectors adorned his walls. Antique surgery tools and dental phantoms sat proudly on his end tables and counters. Preserved rodents, bats, and spiders occupied his mantel, along with the contents of the trunk, the marionette taking center stage. Eric had decided to name the marionette Jerry. Both he and Henry agreed the puppet's angular features, rectangular head, and broad smile made it look like a medieval Jerry Seinfeld. Eric had just finished putting up a few more decorations and lights when he decided to turn in for the evening. The heat was still pretty intense during the day, and all of the outdoor decorating had drained the energy out of him. He took Cerise on her nighttime walk, making sure to pick up after her. Though dog feces can be quite scary, they were not welcome in his display. Eric and Cerise came back inside, and Eric told her it was time for bed. The dog curled up on her favorite wingback chair, put her head down, and blew air out of her nose the way a disappointed child would respond if he told them it was time for bed. Eric crossed the living room toward the stairs leading up to his room. As he reached for the light switch, he turned toward his dog. Good night, Cerise. You were such a good girl today. Cerise did not get up or even open her eyes, but her tail began to wag energetically to show him she understood. Eric then turned toward the mantel. Good night, Jerry. Keep an eye on the other decorations for me, will you? As if in response, Jerry's mouth snapped open with that distinct wooden click sound. Cerise began to whimper and growl in her sleep as the hair on her scruff bristled. Eric felt all the little hairs stand up on the back of his neck as he stared at the puppet in shocked disbelief. Calm down, he thought to himself. It's just an old doll. He made his way cautiously over to the mantel, his eyes locked in a staring contest with Jerry's. Eric reached out with a trembling hand to close the puppet's mouth, expecting the thing to spring to life at any minute. He placed a finger on Jerry's chin and slowly pushed its mouth closed. Eric sighed with relief and made his way back to the light switch, never taking his eyes off of Jerry.
I'll find some wood glue in the morning and take care of that jaw problem you've got there, Jerry,
Eric joked.
Maybe even give you a fresh coat of paint.
With that, Eric turned out the lights and went into his room to have one of the most troubling sleeps of his adult life. That night, Eric could not sleep. His dreams were a labyrinth of nightmares that he struggled to escape. Images of Jerry and his terrible grin haunted Eric's every wakeless second, forcing him to jolt awake and scan the room for the demonic doll. Every creak, every tap, every subtle noise caused Eric to spring awake. It was getting to the point where he wasn't sure if it was better to just stay awake and try to take a nap in the morning. At around 6 a.m., a new noise had shocked Eric from his bed. Downstairs, he could hear the distinct sounds of Cerise barking and snarling. Eric felt a knot form in his stomach. Maybe it's just a rat, Eric hoped as he climbed out of bed. The dog's barking grew louder and more fierce. Eric knew he had to go downstairs and investigate, but fear slowed his movements to a glacial pace. The stairs from the second floor creaked with unease as he crept downstairs to see what Cerise was barking at. Eric peered through the living room doorway. However, what he saw was more annoying than startling. His mantel display had been knocked down and strewn about the floor. Broken display boxes and animal specimens littered the area rug that was below the mantel and in front of the fireplace. The one startling aspect of the scene was that Jerry did not fall all the way to the ground. His marionette controls and string had snagged on the edge of the mantel, causing the puppet to hang and sway like a corpse on a noose. Jerry's mouth hung open as Cerise barked and snarled at him.
Cerise!
Eric yelled.
What did you do?
Despite Eric's accusations, the dog continued to bark and lunge at the dangling puppet. Eric grabbed Cerise's collar and dragged her toward the kitchen. He told Cerise to sit and stay, shutting the door behind him as he returned to the mess she had left. Eric got a broom and began to sweep the broken glass from the rug. From the looks of things, he would not be able to save any of these pieces. Once he was sure he had cleaned up all the glass, Eric untangled the marionette string and set Jerry back on the mantel.
I guess Cerise thinks you're creepy too,
Eric said aloud to the doll. As he turned to let Cerise out of the kitchen, Eric felt a sharp pain in the bottom of his foot.
Fuck!
Eric screamed as he grabbed his foot to see what he had stepped on. A small piece of glass protruded from his heel, glistening in the light as a tiny red stream of blood began to trickle from the wound. Eric hobbled over to the couch and examined his injury. He pushed on the skin around the glass to force it to the surface. He plucked the shard from his foot as blood began to stream faster from the puncture. Eric hopped over to the bathroom, cleaned his wound, and covered it with a bandage. Upon returning to the living room, Eric found Jerry slumped over and lying on his side. Eric limped over to the mantel, not wanting to put pressure on his foot. As he reached for the puppet, Jerry's mouth snapped open again. Eric quickly recoiled his hand. Before he had time to register this new fear, he was startled by a loud bang at his front door.
Eric, you in there?
Henry's familiar voice called from the front door. Still slightly panicked, Eric hobbled over to the front foyer and answered the door. Eric smiled a weak smile at Henry.
Hey, Henry,
Eric said.
How's it going?
Henry looked Eric up and down. He could tell things were out of the ordinary.
I was just going for my morning stroll and decided to see how the display was coming along,
Henry replied.
But from the looks of things, you've had quite a morning.
Eric nodded and explained to Henry what had transpired since the dog had made the mess. Henry shook his head.
Guess that dog of yours hasn't taken a shine to old Jerry yet, huh? Well, at any rate, I just wanted to say your yard decorations are getting pretty sick, even for my taste.
Eric gave Henry a quizzical look.
Henry, I haven't added anything to the outside display.
Henry looked confused, and the two men stepped outside onto the front porch. Dangling from the trees were dozens of dead mice and birds, swaying lazily in the light breeze. Eric swallowed hard. He was suddenly aware of the strings that were wrapped around each animal were identical to the ones that were on Jerry.
Henry?
Eric stammered.
I didn't hang these.
Henry gave Eric a stern look.
Listen, boy,
Henry started.
I'm all for a good scare here and there, but this may drive business away from my farm. I'm asking as a friend, please take 'em down.
Eric, not looking down from the ghoulish menagerie, nodded silently. Henry patted him on the shoulder.
I'm happy you're getting into the spirit of things, but don't go getting carried away.
With that, Henry started back down the dirt road toward his house. Eric retrieved the ladder from the shed and began the grim task of removing these lifeless creatures from his trees. As he finished taking the last morbid ornament down, he heard Cerise barking from inside the house. Eric climbed down the ladder and burst through the front door. To his horror, he found Jerry sitting upright in Cerise's chair. Eric rushed over to the puppet, snatched it off the chair, and chucked it into the fireplace. He then shoved some newspaper and scrap wood under Jerry and struck a match. As he set the ghastly pyre ablaze, Jerry's mouth fell open once again with a hideous click. That night, Eric gathered what remained of the trunk's contents and threw them in the trash. He snapped a picture of the box with his phone and begrudgingly sent it in an email to his mother. He hated contacting her after their falling out, but she knew how to read Hebrew. As he hit send, he glanced over at the fireplace. The fire continued to blaze, but all remnants of Jerry had become smoldering ash. Eric had just walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water when he felt his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled the phone out of his pocket. The caller ID simply read Mom. He took a deep breath and answered.
Hey, Ma.
Hello, Eric?
She responded.
I just got your email. What exactly am I looking at?
Eric did not want to tell her all that had happened since he found the trunk.
It's this really old box that was left by the previous owner. I can't make out what the Hebrew says on the lid.
Eric heard his mother sigh.
You don't even remember enough Hebrew to read a short word like that.
His mother scolded.
Well, at any rate, I hope you left that thing alone.
Eric began to feel the hairs on his neck stand up.
Why?
Eric asked.
What does it say?
Dybbuk,
His mother responded.
old superstition. They're like the demons or spirits. The word actually means adhere or cling.
Eric took a deep breath, but before he could respond, he heard a sharp yelp from the living room.
Mom, I'm going to have to call you back.
Eric hung up the phone and bolted into the living room. The sight that greeted him sent his head spinning. Cerise was thrashing about on the floor in front of the fireplace. Protruding from the ashes was a long, sickly pale arm. Its skeletal fingers were firmly wrapped around the dog's neck.
Cerise!
Eric shouted. With that, the arm gave a quick twist, breaking the dog's neck with a terrible snap. The arm raised Cerise's lifeless form into the air. Then, with one swift motion, threw the dog toward the front door. Eric stood frozen in horror, not knowing what to do or where to run. Before his senses could fully return, all of the lights suddenly snapped off, and the fire went out. Eric groped behind him for the kitchen door, eyes fixated on the unlit fireplace. Eric's phone buzzed violently in his hand. The screen illuminated. The caller ID said Jerry. Before he could do anything, the phone accepted the call and switched to speaker mode. A shrill, unearthly screech emanated from the device as images of an eyeless, gaunt face in gesture paint flashed on the screen. Suddenly, the phone went dark and the screeching stopped. In the darkness, Eric heard something slump onto the floor in the direction of the fireplace. As he turned to run into the kitchen, he heard the sickening thumping of the creature crawling toward him. Henry stood in Eric's yard. An old cigarette clung to his lips. He shook his head. "Mr. Holt, I'll ask you one more time. What were you doing in the deceased's yard so early in the morning?" Henry took a long drag from his cigarette. "I told you, officer. Me and him had become very close. We was fixing to be partners round Halloween time. He'd spook the young'uns and city folks, and I'd sell 'em pumpkins. Poor kid. I knew he was in a bad place. Told me about his wife leaving him. Told me about not being on good terms with his folks. I knew something was off, but never guessed he'd do something like this." The two men turned around to re-examine the horror of which they spoke. In a tree, high above the Halloween grotesquities, hung Cerise, a coarse rope pulled tight around her neck. Hanging beside her swung Eric, face made up to resemble the marionette that sat on the branch that suspended them.
My great-aunt Mildred absolutely adored yard sales. That woman could haggle a tortoise from its shell. I tagged along a lot because she kept me while my parents were at work. She let me pick random junk, and she was an expert haggler when it came down to something actually worth getting. I can play back the whole day that we got the dollhouse. It was in an older development. All of the houses were tan brick with one floor. No basements and single-car garages with driveways leading to them. We'd visited a lot of yard sales in the neighborhood before. My aunt flipped through old records and inspected old dolls. I rummaged through their open garage. In the back corner, I found a purple dollhouse, tall and slender, with a black wooden roof and lavender siding. It had 3 floors, a front and back porch, and was absolutely furnished with tiny furniture that looked like it was fashioned by a master craftsman with bits of sticks and furs. I dragged her over to show her my find.
Dollhouses aren't for boys.
She sighed at me.
Your father will kill me if I buy that for you.
I don't have to use dolls in it. She wiggled it around, peering in the little windows, and trying to open the small exterior doors. I watched her inspection, full of hope. I bounced in anticipation. She tried to hold her poker face, but I knew her better than that. Please?
I suppose keeping it at my house would be all right.
She argued to herself.
And it is beautiful.
She picked it up and lugged it into the woman manning the cash box.
How much?
The lady looked it over, deep in thought.
I suppose I'd take $200 for it.
My aunt choked on air and gave the woman a side-eye that could cut through a steel plate. She sat the house down on the folding table the lady was sitting at and gave me a tap on the shoulder. I followed her back down the driveway to her car.
Hold on,
the lady shouted down her yard to us. My aunt turned around and tilted her head up in a silent,
Yes? I'll take $75 for it.
She sighed.
I'll give you $40 and not a penny over.
My aunt countered. The woman begrudgingly accepted the offer, but she seemed a little too happy for someone who just got a small piece of her asking price. She even carried it to the car and carefully buckled it into the back seat. I kept poking and peering in the windows during the ride home. It was absolutely fascinating to me. Once we got it home, Aunt Mildred was equally enthralled with the tiny details of the home. Its craftsmanship topped any dollhouse I'd ever seen. My childish mind thought maybe it was a real home, just shrunk down to doll size. We couldn't get it open, though. It didn't bisect. The doors and windows would jiggle but not open. Uncle Wayne prodded and tried to pry the doors open with a flathead screwdriver.
You'll mar the detailing.
Aunt Mildred moaned. I'm being careful, he replied calmly, squinting and inspecting the small door. You know.
What?
Mildred asked, trying to look over his shoulder. Well, he mumbled as he started to scrape at the small gap between the door and door frame, knocking off the old paint.
I said don't mar the details.
Mildred shrieked.
That's what gives it so much character.
It's fine, he said dismissively. The door and the frame are welded shut.
Dollhouses aren't welded shut, and they certainly aren't metal.
Mildred said with a dismissive tone of her own. He pulled a magnet from his toolbox, and it slammed itself to the house with a hollow thunk. Aunt Mildred was not impressed.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, at least it's probably worth more in scrap than what you paid, Wayne offered.
Why would you scrap something that's this beautiful?
Well, for starters, it's sealed up but not much good for anything other than looking at.
Wade can use his imagination to find more uses for it,
she said matter-of-factly. Second of all, Wayne continued unfazed, the doll that's at the kitchen table is creepy as all get out.
What doll?
Mildred and I exclaimed, pushing Wayne out of the way and shoving our eyes up to the small glass windows. Sure enough, sitting at the table was a rail-thin male doll, just like the house. He had every detail that you could imagine. His clothes were bright and vivid. His face has every detail down to nostrils and teeth. He had a small nose that came to a slightly upward point.
Wade?
Aunt Mildred called from next to me.
Did you notice the doll or the meal at the table before?
I shook my head no. I wonder how we missed it. Even now, I know I never saw that doll anywhere in there. During the ride home, he was just there and never left. It should have been a red flag, but instead, it captivated our imaginations. What other secrets were hidden away inside of the purple shell? That night over dinner, we discussed how we could get into it. I thought you were concerned with destroying a lovely piece of craftsmanship, Wayne pointed out between forks of kielbasa.
But think of the possibilities,
my aunt said dreamily. It could even have money inside. I mused with ideas of video games and pizza. I guess if I used a hand tool with a fine grinding wheel, it wouldn't be a big deal to work the welds away, Wayne conceded, a little curious himself. After dinner, we went to inspect it again, and for Wayne to form a plan of attack. Busting open the front door wasn't worth the effort. It was too small. Pulling and tugging didn't reveal any obvious weak points. It was built like a brick house. Then I noticed two of the corners were different from the other two. One was slightly bulbous, and the other much flatter than the other two. A hinge and a welded edge. Wayne went through multiple grinding wheels that night on his little hand tool. In the morning, I'll run to the hardware store and get something sturdier, he commented as he gave up for the night. That night, as I was drifting off, a sickly emerald light diffused out of the little windows. A man's silhouette projected out of the windows like an old movie projector. I crept out of bed and peered into the windows. I started to gasp, but held my breath and covered my mouth. The doll was walking around. He shuffled weakly through the kitchenette, digging through cabinets. He flipped through tiny books, and his shoulders heaved with the boredom of familiarity. He looked up from his book, and our eyes met. He approached the window with the caution of a sick animal. The palm he pressed to the tiny glass pane was wrinkly up close. I put my pointer finger up to his hand in solidarity. His jaws moved like he was speaking, but his words were muted. In an attempt to hear, I leaned in close and held my breath. Silent words fell upon deaf ears. I must have fallen asleep shortly after that. It frankly felt like a dream. I still told Aunt Mildred after I woke up considerably later than usual.
You must have been worn out.
She exclaimed as my groggy body navigated the staircase. I watched the dollhouse a lot, I admitted.
Did you see anything good at least?
She asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. There's this weird green light, and I saw the doll moving around. She put her hand to my forehead and waited a moment.
No fever.
She thought aloud.
I think you dreamed more than you watched, dear.
He was trying to talk to me, but he couldn't.
I insisted.
He even put his hand up to the window, and I put my finger on it.
Let's get you some breakfast.
She said as she ushered me into the kitchen.
When Uncle Wayne gets back and breaks through the welds, you'll see it's just a plain old doll.
The weld on the edge went. Then we found more along the roofline. They had even welded the seam on the underside. We sanded the paint on the hinge away and sprayed it gently with lubricant. Mildred took one corner, while Wayne took the other. As they pulled and grunted, it cracked and slid open with a screech of metal on metal. A dim green light flashed as an earthy musk rolled out of the house. The doll was gone. Every tiny cabinet worked. Every drawer. The books even had tiny illegible scrawlings on each page. It was truly a masterpiece. I played with it using every toy I owned. My aunt concluded that the doll must have been some kind of optical illusion with the windows. I bought it back then. My adolescent mind could not yet think critically. It sounded good, and that was good enough. I stayed up that night. I tried to sleep, but I had to know if I was crazy. No green light came from the dollhouse. So I nestled myself between the open halves of the dollhouse and inspected every inch. There was no ambulatory doll either. I checked it all again, hoping to find any evidence that he had been there. There was a groan behind me, like a tree branch bowing under the weight of a sudden wet snow. I turned, thinking the noise was the door to the guest room. A figure loomed and greeted me with a smile. My eyes were so close to its teeth that I could see rings. One of the front teeth had a wood knot dead center. It was the doll, but now he was the size of a man. Dusty red locks of yarn hung from his head. His body creaked like an old wooden floor as he raised a hushing finger to his lips. You freed me, eh? All I could do was shrug, trying to find any words. Questions. Answers. A screech. Before I could, he crumpled into the floor and was gone without a trace. My aunt came into my bewildered face.
The doll!
I stammered.
He was big!
What are you talking about?
She asked incredulously. I stumbled over my words incoherently, desperately trying to explain the doll was real.
No.
She interrupted my babble.
You need to go to sleep. It was all a bad dream.
Aunt Mildred put me back in bed with a hug and a kiss. I tried to fend off the sleep, but my eyelids grew heavier and heavier. I tried to hold them open as I heard the low, heavy groan of flexing wood. The tall man leaned over my bed. The noises that came from his mouth were gibberish to my ears, but his expression was joyous. When I woke up, there was an earthy musk around me. It was as if I had been out rolling in wood chips and soil. The smell stalked me, persisting through showers. The over-chlorinated swimming pools would be frequented in the summer, and multiple romps through streams. The whole summer, it felt like I had someone with me at all times. Sinister whispers filled any void of silence that I could get. I was old enough to know that if I told them I heard voices, they wouldn't react kindly. The closer I got to the woods, the louder the whispers were.
What do you desire?
It whispered in my ear as I tried to sleep, head sandwiched between pillows. From then on, it was a clear voice. Sometimes other noises nearly drowned it out. The inflection changed from time to time, as did the content, from a question to a taunt. Sometimes I would even catch it laughing a hearty belly laugh at an unheard joke. I tried to ignore it. Voices had to come from somewhere, and this one certainly lacked a body.
Bitcoin that you need,
it whispered into the room where I was playing in a voice so light, if anyone else had been near, it would have been imperceivable. I steeled myself against acknowledging it, the sound of its voice twisting my guts into cramped ropes. I busied myself with Legos. After a time without a response, it tried again.
Trinkets? Baubles?
My abstinence from the conversation forced it to dig deeper.
Is it wine you thirst for? The finest tobacco to fill your lungs?
Even to my young mind, the offer of alcohol and tobacco was so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh a little. That minute acknowledgement only encouraged it.
Will it be luck with the women folk, or is your fancy to be the desire of men?
It sneered with devious delight. As a 35-year-old man, I can still feel how my cheeks burned at the awkward, too personal inquiry. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen to be lucky with love. Still, I remained silent. The room was silent like it was digging deeper, searching for an offer I couldn't refuse. I decided to go find Aunt Mildred. The voice left me alone and other people were nearby. To my surprise, the playroom door was closed. I absolutely never closed the door behind me, especially if I was going to be in the room. The familiar cold brass of the doorknob was missing. The door and knob were all one piece of wood.
Perhaps an exit would suit you, friend,
the voice said hopefully. Determined to ignore it, I jerked and shook the doorknob to no avail. As if it were solid with a frame and wall, it didn't bow, shake, or rattle.
I know you can hear me, lad,
it said with a chuckle.
I'd like to reward you for getting me out of that forsaken prison.
I squeezed my eyes tight and took a breath. I turned and stomped across the room in frustration. It took all of my might, but the old wood-framed window scooted up, the paint in the groove giving its all to thwart me.
Clever you are,
it exclaimed.
But you laughed at my joke, and I know you saw me in that playhouse.
I paused halfway through the window, chilled and dumbfounded in the hot summer air. Was there some kind of ghost, or worse yet, demon, trapped in that old dollhouse? Was that why the woman was getting rid of it? I knew I had to drag Aunt Mildred into this. The fall from the window onto the wooden porch was pretty much non-existent. I circled around through the front door and found my aunt sitting at the dining room table.
Annie M.,
I called with an uneasy crack of my voice.
Are ghosts real?
Mildred was certainly a third grandmother and came close to being a second parent to me in her own right. She knew something was amiss.
I think they're just stories.
She said with a squint and wrinkle of her brow.
Just for fun. Some people like scary things.
I bit my lip and stared at the floor, a lump in my throat stopping me from elaborating. Mildred read that too.
They could be, though,
she said with fake uncertainty.
There are all kinds of things we have a hard time understanding. Did you see a television program about a ghost?
Well, I was playing with the dollhouse and...
Don't do it,
the voice growled. I felt the color drain from my cheeks, and the knot in my stomach tighten.
Well, you were playing with the dollhouse and...
Mildred probed, the furrows on her brow growing deeper. Mildred's gentle tone and demeanor comforted me like a warm blanket in frigid winter.
Before Wayne opened it, I was looking inside and there was...
Boy!
The voice snapped.
Do not speak of me. You will pay a steeper price than your tiny mind could comprehend. I promise you that.
The voice echoed in my mind. Unimaginably gory and grotesque possibilities flashing through my head. Channels being flipped on a television. My stomach cramped, and I doubled over, dry heaving a payload that wouldn't come. Aunt Mildred's puzzled eyes gave me strength. I crept towards her and whispered as if he couldn't hear.
Can't you hear him?
Hear who, baby?
The wooden man from the dollhouse.
I whispered, the mere phrase lingering on my taste buds like an infection.
You mean that old wooden doll that was locked inside?
I think he was living there.
I said, do not speak of me.
The voice growled. I clammed up and cowered in the protective embrace of my still puzzled aunt. She shushed me and rubbed my back.
We can get rid of that doll if it's bothering you,
she suggested. She walked me to the playroom without saying a word. The door opened like it was brand new. The window I escaped through was closed and latched. Alone on the table sat the dollhouse, open to the hinge with its contents on display. Much to my shock, the furniture of every little room was empty.
Where did he go?
I stammered.
He should have been in the kitchen, sitting at the table.
I'm sure you just misplaced it.
Mildred assured me, with her hand on my shoulder.
We'll find it and donate it.
But then it'd be mean to another kid.
I blurted. Words cannot convey the weight that was lifted by vomiting that simple sentence to another human being. Even as a kid, I knew she didn't believe me. Mildred was looking around uncomfortably, looking for the right words, scrounging for the root of the thought that an inanimate doll could be anything other than a doll.
The doll is being mean to you,
she clarified.
I guess he mostly bugs me, but he locked me in the playroom just now. And I had to climb out of the window and...
The playroom door is wide open right now, sweetie,
she said, pointing over my shoulder at the ajar door. I stammered, trying to make sense of it out loud.
I think you'll feel better after a nap,
she assured me.
No, I'm not tired. The door wouldn't even wiggle,
I protested.
Let's park those shoes, and you'll feel better after you wake up. I promise.
I begrudgingly let her walk me into her sewing room and laid down for a nap on the bottom bunk. She closed the door to a sliver. I curled up under the heavy handmade quilt and settled into the soft mattress and welcoming pillow. Every time my eyelids grew heavy and started to shut, the sounds of a silent house settling jarred me back awake. I wanted to believe Mildred, and I tried my damnedest to ignore the creaking that neared the cracked door. I stared at the sliver of light, waiting for a body to block the light coming in. No one came through the door, but the next creak was in the walls and ceiling of the room. I clutched the quilt and tried to force myself to sleep to avoid it. The wooden bed frame let out a long, low-pitched creak that jarred my eyes open while leaving my body paralyzed in bed.
Aye. So how about that favor I was offering you?
The voice asked calmly, its words quiet, yet seemingly vibrating the bed frame. I squeezed my eyes shut tight and tried to tune it out.
Not so talkative without your ain't-in. Aye. I could see that being such a twerp.
A hard wooden arm stopped me from rolling off of the bed and making a run for it. My attempt to scream was muffled by a smooth wooden hand over my mouth, an oblong shape, stretched from the wooden struts that supported the upper bunk. The tighter the grain stretched, the more pronounced its facial contours and topography became. A pine needle mustache brushed against my nose as he spoke.
What, my dear boy, do you desire?
He demanded in a low tone that smelled of fresh sawdust. I shook my head back and forth and tried to roll away again. This time, the resistance was met with a hard hand to my small throat.
I suppose that man will be suitable too,
he mused.
I know what he wants, but it won't be good for you. He's a nasty thing, really.
I stopped and stared into his white, empty eyes.
Wayne?
I whispered, baffled by his words. He grinned, his mouth full of dark mahogany teeth.
Is that his name? You don't know about his hobbies?
Teeth. The bargaining felt more like swindling. But the devious prodding about Wayne felt honest for some reason. He always came across as weird to me. Did he hate me? Did he hate Mildred?
I could ask for anything?
I whispered into his head.
Aye. To be completely free, we need an exchange.
He said as he slid his hand away from my mouth.
An exchange?
You get something, and I get something.
Did you get your part already?
Oh, don't worry your little head about me. We can shore that up later. I want this to be a good deal for you.
His affect was calm, but his presence felt predatory. I hoped and prayed someone would find me. My eyes wandered over to the sliver of light that cut through the room, through the cracked door. A body interrupted the light, and hope must have filled my eyes.
I will not be interrupted!
The man from the dollhouse roared, sharply swinging his arm, palm from my mouth towards the door. The door landed in the frame with enough force to shake the entire house. Muffled yelling and pounding at the unwavering door crept through the walls. As he glared down at me, he released my neck and used both hands to pull his form forth from the wood. He groaned as the wood cracked and creaked as the grain stretched. His legs and torso began to emerge from seemingly nothing. I rolled off of the bed and under Mildred's sewing table.
There's nowhere to hide, lad,
he moaned as he continued to substantiate his body.
We're going to shore this up. I have centuries of imprisonment to make up for.
We could see each other. His eyes burned a dark yellow, and he grinned. I rummaged through the storage compartment and hid an old black pair of scissors that she kept. I prayed for the first time in my life. I prayed with my heart and desperation that he didn't see my only chance to defend myself. I curled in as far under the table as I could, and I waited and waited, a white-knuckle grip above the finger holes, and nestled between my body and the wall. My heart stopped momentarily when his hand hit the floor. The other hand slowly followed, slow and deliberate. The gravity and intention behind his stiff and purposeful movements acted as a series of red flags and alarms to vacate. I gripped the old, bumpy scissors so tight my hand shook. It took him 2 steps to get from the bed to the sewing table. My heart went from pounding in my ears to barely moving. I held my breath and steeled my resolve to kill if he came for me. The room was silent, except for the rare thump of my heart. I stared at his bare feet, striped with the grain of the wood, crowned by a nail colored a yellow I've only seen from pus. Time stood still. I was hyper-focused on the small opening he could come through. He didn't wiggle or fidget. The legs were as still as table legs. My focus was shattered by the soft sound of a single twig snapping underfoot behind me. I jerked around, and his face was shoved against mine, protruding from the wood panel. I tried to scoot back into the room, but his legs stood strong like stone pillars. He howled a triumphant laugh before taunting.
Nowhere to run. Shall we speak business now?
I had to do it. I silently psyched myself up. I slammed the black-bladed scissors into his left eye. The noise he made was somewhere in the intersection of a laugh, scream, and an enraged roar. His wooden face split into several places, radiating out from the wound, and a dull green light filled the cubby, leaking from the voids. His hands burst from his sides of the sewing desk, and I started kicking at his painted face, as hard and as fast as I could, trying to escape the prison his legs had formed. My haphazard kicks shoved the scissors further in. His knees buckled, and I scooted across the old napped carpet and into the room. Suddenly, I could hear Wayne and Mildred banging on the door, and it was starting to wiggle and flex against their force now. The wooden man was still in pursuit, his pained moans filling the room as he dragged his body from under the sewing table. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door. I twisted the lock on the knob. Wayne and Mildred spilled in. They started to give me the what for, But then their words were silenced by the sight of the monstrosity on the floor, with scissors hanging out of its face.
Is that the wooden man?
Mildred asked quietly. I nodded, sheltering behind her.
Yes. I told you he was real.
You'll never be rid of me until you make that deal, boy.
He creaked, the strange lime-colored light leaking from his mouth as it moved.
Wayne, get the dollhouse.
Mildred quietly commanded.
It can go out the way it came.
He ran for it. No questions or second-guessing. Mildred stood above the thing, as it tried to claw its way towards me. She shoved the scissors in until the handles hugged his eye socket, and scowled at him with disapproval. Wayne stumbled back in with the heavy playhouse. Mildred sharply pointed at the space in the front of the wooden man, and he threw it down with a thunk.
Get back in your cage.
She growled. The cold iron being near him seemed to take more of his spunk away from him, but he still laughed.
There's not a chance you're getting me back in that prison, you hag.
Mildred went to kick the scissors again, but found his hand gripping her ankle midair. Her expression went from surprise to wailing in pain as the crunch of bone filled the room. Arms and legs sprouted from his torso, like a centipede, and he scuttled towards me, letting Mildred fall towards the floor. Wayne charged in, but one of the arms jutted out and snagged his neck, leaving him swinging like a rag doll. His mouth smelled like rotting wood and carcass this time.
This is the last chance.
He growled his amusement at a distant memory.
Either I get what I need, or your precious family will perish in this room, and I haunt you until the end of your days.
What do you need?
I stammered.
Your soul has to replace mine for the sake of that forsaken box you cut open.
But you're out of it. You're free to go.
I pleaded, tears burning my young eyes.
I am outside of it, but alas, I am still bound to it by magic. I cannot interfere. You get what you want. Then, per the ancient written law of my people, I may harvest your soul and be free. You're saving two people you love, and helping a stranger just by spending some time in a playhouse. Maybe they could even find someone to replace you one day.
My breathing spiraled out of control. My aunt was trying to get up but was wheezing with pain. My uncle hung in the air, clawing and fighting to get free, while fruitlessly gasping for air. Then, a moment of clarity. A hole in the game.
I can have anything?
I asked, coughing up snot. His good eye lit up. The light from his wounds and mouth burned brighter.
Absolutely. No questions asked. You even get to enjoy it for a bit before I take what is mine.
I want you back in the playhouse.
He was infuriated. He tried to lunge at me, but the thick green light left his body in a smoky cloud. It sucked into the dollhouse like steam into the vent above the stove. Wayne was fine, if not terrified and bruised on his neck. He started to go call an ambulance, but Mildred stopped him.
Weld it shut first.
She ordered with no uncertainty.
I can wait.
He dragged the dollhouse back to the garage, the windows all obscured by the green, glowing mist. He welded the back along the broken beads, and welded the hinges into solid pieces. After Mildred's leg was set and in a cast, we rode with him to a new development they were building nearby. The entire ride, the wooden man banged on the doors and windows of his prison, cursing and threatening us. Wayne buried his prison in a plot that was measured out and had forms set for concrete. We drove by the next morning to see a concrete truck pouring a new foundation over him.
Day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank, where a dim and little-traveled trail led eastward to the fat spruce timberland. It was a steep bank, and he paused for breath at the top, excusing the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. There was no sun, nor hint of sun. No, there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day, and yet there seemed an intangible pall over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun, and he knew that a few more days must pass before that cheerful orb due south would just peep above the skyline and dip immediately from view. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, rolling in gentle undulations where the ice jams of the freeze-up had formed. North and south, as far as his eye could see, it was unbroken white, save for a dark hairline that curved and twisted from around the spruce-covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce-covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail, that led south 500 miles to the Chilkoot Pass, Dyea, and Salt Water, and that led north 70 miles to Dawson, and still on to the north 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on Bering Sea, 1,000 miles, and half 1,000 more. But all this, the mysterious far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness and weirdness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer in this land, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such facts impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, but that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature, and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold, and from there on it did not lead him to the conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe. 50 degrees below zero stood for the bite of frost that hurt, and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear flaps, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him just precisely 50 degrees below zero. That there should be anything more to it than that was a thought that had never entered his head. As he turned to go on, he spat speculatively. There was a sharp, explosive crackle that startled him. He spat again, and again in the air before it could fall to the snow. The spittle crackled. He knew that at 50 below, spittle crackled in the snow, but this spittle had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly it was colder than 50 below. How much colder, he did not know. But the temperature did not matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. They had come across the divide from the Indian Creek country, while he had come to the roundabout way to take a look at the possibilities of getting out logs in the spring from the islands in the Yukon. He would be into camp by 6 o'clock. A bit after dark, it was true, but the boys would be there. A fire would be going, and a hot supper would be ready. As for lunch, he pressed his hand against the protruding bundle under his jacket. It was also under his shirt, wrapped up in a handkerchief and lying against the naked skin. It was the only way to keep the biscuits from freezing. He smiled agreeably to himself as he thought of those biscuits, each cut open and sopped in bacon grease, and each enclosing a generous slice of fried bacon. He plunged in among the big spruce trees. The trail was faint, A foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed over, and he was glad he was without a sled, traveling light. In fact, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he concluded as he rubbed his numb nose and cheekbones with his mittened hand. He was a warm, whiskered man, but the hair on his face did not protect the high cheekbones and the eager nose that thrust itself aggressively into the frosty air. At the man's heel trotted a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, gray-coated and without any visible or temperamental differences from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale that was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, then 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Since the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that 107 degrees of frost obtained. The dog did not know anything about thermometers. Possibly in its brain there was no sharp consciousness of a condition of very cold such as was in the man's brain, but the brute had its instinct. It experienced a vague but menacing apprehension that subdued it and made it slink along at the man's heels, and that made it question eagerly every unwanted movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire, or else to burrow under the snow and cuddle its warmth away from the air. The frozen moisture of its breathing had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost, and especially where its jowls, muzzle, and eyelashes whitened by its crystalled breath. The man's red beard and mustache were likewise frosted, but more solidly, the deposit taking the form of ice and increasing with every warm, moist breath he exhaled. Also, the man was chewing tobacco, and the muzzle of ice held his lips so rigidly that he was unable to clear his chin when he expelled the juice. The result was that a crystal beard of the color and solidity of amber was increasing its length on his chin. If he fell down, it would shatter itself like glass into brittle fragments, but he did not mind the appendage. It was the penalty all tobacco chewers paid in that country, and he had been out before in 2 cold snaps. They had not been so cold as this, he knew, but by the spirit thermometer at 60 mile, he knew they had been registered at 50 below, and at 55. He held on through the level stretch of woods for several miles, crossed a wide flat of rigger heads, and dropped down a bank to the frozen bed of a small stream. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew he was 10 miles from the forks. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was making 4 miles an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the forks at 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog dropped in again at his heels with a tail drooping discouragement as the man swung along the creek bed. The furrow of the old sled trail was plainly visible, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last runners. In a month, no man had come up or down that silent creek. The man held steadily on. He was not much given to thinking, and just then, particularly, he had nothing to think about save that he would eat lunch at the forks, and that at 6 o'clock he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and, had there been, speech would have been impossible because of the ice muzzle on his mouth. So, he continued monotonously to chew tobacco and to increase the length of his amber beard. Once in a while, the thought reiterated itself that it was very cold and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mittened hand. He did this automatically, now and again changing hands. But, rub as he would, the instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb, and the following instant the end of his nose went numb. He was sure to frost his cheeks, he knew that, and experienced a pang of regret that he had not devised a nose strap of the sort Bud wore in cold snaps. Such a strap passed across the cheeks as well, and saved them. But it didn't matter much after all. What were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that was all. They were never serious. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was keenly observant, and he noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and bends and timber jams, and always he sharply noted where he placed his feet. Once coming around a bend, he shied abruptly, like a startled horse, curved away from the place where he had been walking, and retreated several paces back along the trail. The creek, he knew, was frozen clear to the bottom. No creek contained water in that Arctic winter, but he knew also that there were springs that bubbled out from the hillsides and ran along under the snow and on top of the ice of the creek. He knew that the coldest snaps never froze these springs, and he knew likewise their danger. They were traps. They had pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep, or 3 feet. Sometimes a skin of ice 1/2 inch thick covered them, and in turn was covered by the snow. Sometimes there were alternate layers of ice and ice skin, so that when one broke through, he kept on breaking through for a while, sometimes wetting himself to the waist. That was why he had shied in such panic. He had felt the give under his feet and heard the crackle of a snow-hidden ice skin, and to get his feet wet in such a temperature meant trouble and danger. At the very least, it meant delay, for he would be forced to stop and build a fire, and under its protection to bare his feet while he dried his socks and moccasins. He stood and studied the creek bed and its banks, and decided that the flow of water came from the right. He reflected a while, rubbing his nose and cheeks, then skirted to the left, stepping gingerly and testing the footing of each step. Once clear of the danger, he took a fresh chew of tobacco and swung along at his 4-mile gait. In the course of the next 2 hours, he came upon several similar traps. Usually the snow above the hidden pools had a sunken, candied appearance that advertised the danger. Once again, however, he had a close call, and once, suspecting danger, he compelled the dog to go in front. The dog did not want to go. It hung back until the man shoved it forward, and then it went quickly across the white, unbroken surface. Suddenly, it broke through, floundered to one side, and got away to firmer footing. It had wet its 4 feet and legs, and almost immediately the water that clung to it turned to ice. It made quick efforts to lick the ice off its legs, then dropped down in the snow and began to bite out the ice that had formed between the toes. This was a matter of instinct. To permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know this. It merely obeyed the mysterious prompting that rose from the deep crypts of its being. But the man knew, having achieved a judgment on the subject, and he removed the mitten from his right hand and helped tear out the ice particles. He did not expose his fingers more than a minute, and was astonished at the swift numbness that smote them. It certainly was cold. He pulled on the mitten hastily and beat the hand savagely across his chest. At 12 o'clock, the day was at its brightest, yet the sun was too far south in its winter journey to clear the horizon. The bulge of the earth intervened between it and Henderson Creek, where the man walked under a clear sky at noon and cast no shadow. At 12:30 to the minute, he arrived at the forks of the creek. He was pleased at the speed he had made. If he kept it up, he would certainly be with the boys by 6. He unbuttoned his jacket and shirt and drew forth his lunch. The action consumed no more than 1/4 of a minute, yet, in that brief moment, the numbness laid hold of his exposed fingers. He did not put the mittens on, but instead struck the fingers a dozen sharp smashes against his leg. Then, he sat down in a snow-covered log to eat. The sting that followed upon the striking of his fingers against his legs ceased so quickly that he was startled. He had had no chance to take a bite of biscuit. He struck the fingers repeatedly and returned them to the mitten, baring the other hand for the purpose of eating. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice muzzle prevented. He had forgotten to build a fire and thaw out. He chuckled at his foolishness, and as he chuckled he noted the numbness creeping into the exposed fingers. Also, he noted that the stinging which had first come to his toes when he sat down was already passing away. He wondered whether the toes were warm or numb. He moved them inside the moccasins and decided that they were numb. He pulled the mitten on hurriedly and stood up. He was a bit frightened. He stamped up and down until the stinging returned into the feet. It certainly was cold, was his thought. That man from Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth when telling how cold it sometimes got in the country, and he had laughed at him at the time. That showed one must not be too sure of things. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. He strode up and down, stamping his feet and threshing his arms until reassured by the returning warmth. Then he got out matches and proceeded to make a fire. From the undergrowth where high water of the previous spring had lodged a supply of seasoned twigs, he got his firewood. Working carefully from a small beginning, he soon had a roaring fire, over which he thawed the ice from his face, and in the protection of which he ate his biscuits. For the moment, the cold of space was outwitted. The dog took satisfaction in the fire, stretching out close enough for warmth, and far enough away to escape being singed. When the man had finished, he filled his pipe and took his comfortable time over a smoke. Then he pulled on his mittens, settled the ear flaps of his cap firmly about his ears, and took the creek trail up the left fork. The dog was disappointed and yearned back toward the fire. This man did not know cold. Possibly all the generations of his ancestry had been ignorant of cold, of real cold, of cold 107 degrees below freezing point. But the dog knew. All its ancestry knew, and it had inherited the knowledge. And it knew that it was not good to walk abroad in such fearful cold. It was the time to lie snug in a hole in the snow and wait for a curtain of cloud to be drawn across the face of outer space whence this cold came. On the other hand, there was no keen intimacy between the dog and the man. The one was the toil slave of the other, and the only caresses it had ever received were the caresses of the whiplash, and of harsh and menacing throat sounds that threatened the whiplash. So, the dog made no effort to communicate its apprehension to the man. It was not concerned in the welfare of the man. It was for its own sake that it yearned back toward the fire. But the man whistled and spoke to it with the sound of whiplashes, and the dog swung in at the man's heel and followed after. The man took a chew of tobacco and proceeded to start a new amber beard. Also, his moist breath quickly powdered with white his mustache, eyebrows, and lashes. There did not seem to be so many springs on the left fork of the Henderson, and for half an hour the man saw no signs of any. And then it happened. At a place where there were no signs, where the soft, unbroken snow seemed to advertise solidity beneath, the man broke through. It was not deep. He wet himself halfway to the knees before he floundered out to the firm crust. He was angry and cursed his luck aloud. He had hoped to get into camp with the boys at 6 o'clock, and this would delay him an hour, for he would have to build a fire and dry out his footgear. This was imperative at that low temperature. He knew that much, and he turned aside to the bank, which he climbed. On top, tangled in the underbrush about the trunks of several small spruce trees, was a high-water deposit of dry firewood, sticks and twigs principally, but also larger portions of seasoned branches and fine, dry last year's grasses. He threw down several large pieces on top of the snow. This served for a foundation and prevented the young flame from drowning itself in the snow it otherwise would melt. The fire he got by touching a match to a small shred of birch bark that he took out of his pocket. This burned even more readily than paper. Placing it on the foundation, he fed the young flame with wisps of dry grass and with the tiniest dry twigs. He worked slowly and carefully, keenly aware of his danger. Gradually, as the flame grew stronger, he increased the size of the twigs with which he fed it. He squatted in the snow, pulling the twigs out from their entanglement in the brush and feeding directly to the flame. He knew there must be no failure. When it is 75 below zero, a man must not fail in his first attempt to build a fire. That is, if his feet are wet. If his feet are dry and he fails, he can run along the trail for half a mile and restore his circulation. But the circulation of wet and freezing feet cannot be restored by running when it is 75 below. No matter how fast he runs, the wet feet will freeze the harder. All this the man knew. The old-timer on Sulphur Creek had told him about it the previous fall, and now he was appreciating the advice. Already all sensation had gone out of his feet. To build the fire, he had been forced to remove his mittens, and the fingers had quickly gone numb. His pace of 4 miles an hour had kept his heart pumping blood to the surface of his body and to all the extremities. But the instant he stopped, the action of the pump eased down. The cold of space smote the unprotected tip of the planet, and he, being on that unprotected tip, received the full force of the blow. The blood of his body recoiled before it. The blood was alive, like the dog, and like the dog it wanted to hide away and cover itself up from the fearful cold. So long as he walked 4 miles an hour, he pumped that blood, willy-nilly, to the surface. But now, it ebbed away and sank down into the recesses of his body. The extremities were the first to feel its absence. His wet feet froze the faster, and his exposed fingers numbed the faster, though they had not yet begun to freeze. Nose and cheeks were already freezing, while the skin of all his body chilled as it lost its blood. But he was safe. Toes and nose and cheeks would be only touched by the frost, for the fire was beginning to burn with strength. He was feeding it with twigs the size of his finger. In another minute, he would be able to feed it with branches the size of his wrist, and then he could remove his wet footgear, and while it dried, he could keep his naked feet warm by the fire, rubbing them at first, of course, with snow. The fire was a success. He was safe. He remembered the advice of the old-timer on Sulphur Creek and smiled. The old-timer had been very serious in laying down the law that no man must travel alone in the Klondike after 50 below. Well, here he was. He had had the accident. He was alone, and he had saved himself. Those old-timers were rather womanish, some of them, he thought. All a man had to do was to keep his head, and he was all right. Any man who was a man could travel alone. But it was surprising, the rapidity with which his cheeks and nose were freezing, and he had not thought his fingers could go lifeless in so short a time. Lifeless they were, for he could scarcely make them move together to grip a twig, and they seemed remote from his body and from him. When he touched a twig, he had to look and see whether or not he had hold of it. The wires were pretty well down between him and his finger ends, all of which counted for little. There was the fire, snapping and crackling and promising life with every dancing flame. He started to untie his moccasins. They were coated with ice. The thick German socks were like sheaths of iron halfway to the knees, and the moccasin strings were like rods of steel, all twisted and knotted as by some conflagration. For a moment he tugged with his numb fingers. Then, realizing the folly of it, he drew his sheath knife. But before he could cut the strings, it happened. It was his own fault, or rather his mistake. He should not have built the fire under the spruce tree. He should have built it in the open, but it had been easier to pull the twigs from the brush and drop them directly on the fire. Now, the tree under which he had done this carried a weight of snow on its boughs. No wind had blown for weeks, and each bough was fully freighted. Each time he had pulled a twig, he had communicated a slight agitation to the tree, an imperceptible agitation so far as he was concerned, but an agitation sufficient to bring about the disaster. High up in the tree, one bough capsized its load of snow. This fell on the boughs beneath, capsizing them. This process continued, spreading out and involving the whole tree. It grew like an avalanche, and it descended without warning upon the man and the fire. And the fire was blotted out. Where it had burned was a mantle of fresh and disordered snow. The man was shocked. It was as though he had just heard his own sentence of death. For a moment he sat and stared at the spot where the fire had been. Then he grew very calm. Perhaps the old-timer on Sulphur Creek was right. If he had only had a trailmate, he would have been in no danger now. The trailmate could have built the fire. Well, it was up to him to build the fire over again, and this second time, there must be no failure. Even if he succeeded, he would most likely lose some toes. His feet must be badly frozen by now, and there would be some time before the second fire was ready. Such were his thoughts, but he did not sit and think them. He was busy all the time. They were passing through his mind. He made a new foundation for a fire, this time in the open, where no treacherous tree could blot it out. Next, he gathered dry grasses and tiny twigs from the high water flotsam. He could not bring his fingers together to pull them out, but he was able to gather them by the handful. In this way, he got many rotten twigs and bits of green moss that were undesirable, but it was the best he could do. He worked methodically, even collecting an armful of the larger branches to be used later when the fire gathered strength. And all the while, the dog sat and watched him, a certain yearning wistfulness in its eyes, for it looked upon him as the fire provider, and the fire was slow in coming. When all was ready, the man reached in his pocket for a second piece of birch bark. He knew the bark was there, and though he could not feel it with his fingers, he could hear its crisp rustling as he fumbled for it. Try as he would, he could not clutch hold of it, and all the time in his consciousness was the knowledge that each instant his feet were freezing. This thought tended to put him in a panic, but he fought against it and kept calm. He pulled on his mittens with his teeth and threshed his arms back and forth, beating his hands with all his might against his sides. He did this sitting down, and he stood up to do it, and all the while the dog sat in the snow, its wolf brush of a tail curled around warmly over its forefeet. Its sharp wolf ears pricked forward intently as it watched the man. And the man, as he beat and threshed with his arms and hands, felt a great surge of envy as he regarded the creature that was warm and secure in its natural covering. After a time, he was aware of the first faraway signals of sensation in his beaten fingers. The faint tingling grew stronger till it evolved into a stinging ache that was excruciating, but which the man hailed with satisfaction. He stripped the mitten from his right hand and fetched forth the birch bark. The exposed fingers were quickly going numb again. Next, he brought out his bunch of sulfur matches, but the tremendous cold had already driven the life out of his fingers. In his effort to separate one match from the others, the whole bunch fell in the snow. He tried to pick it out of the snow, but failed. The dead fingers could neither touch nor clutch. He was very careful. He drove the thought of his freezing feet and nose and cheeks out of his mind, devoting his whole soul to the matches. He watched, using the sense of vision in place of that of touch, and when he saw his fingers on each side the bunch, he closed them. That is, he willed them to close, for the wires were down, and the fingers did not obey. He pulled the mitten on the right hand and beat it furiously against his knee. Then, with both mittened hands, he scooped the bunch of matches, along with much snow, into his lap. Yet, he was no better off. After some manipulation, he managed to get the bunch between the heels of his mittened hands. In this fashion, he carried it to his mouth. The ice crackled and snapped when, by a violent effort, he opened his mouth. He drew the lower jaw in, curled the upper lip out of the way, and scraped the bunch with his upper teeth in order to separate a match. He succeeded in getting one, which he dropped on his lap. He was no better off. He could not pick it up. Then, he devised a way. He picked it up in his teeth and scratched it on his leg. 20 times he scratched before he succeeded in lighting it. As it flamed, he held it with his teeth to the birch bark, but the burning brimstone went up his nostrils and into his lungs, causing him to cough spasmodically. The match fell into the snow and went out. The old-timer on Sulphur Creek was right, he thought, in the moment of controlled despair that ensued. After 50 below, a man should travel with a partner. He beat his hands but failed in exciting any sensation. Suddenly, he bared both hands, removing the mittens with his teeth. He caught the whole bunch between the heels of his hands. His arm muscles not being frozen enabled him to press the hand heels tightly against the matches. Then, he scratched the bunch along his leg. It flared into flame, 70 sulfur matches at once. There was no wind to blow them out. He kept his head to one side to escape the strangling fumes and held the blazing bunch to the birch bark. As he so held it, he became aware of sensation in his hand. His flesh was burning. He could smell it. Deep down below the surface, he could feel it. The sensation developed into pain that grew acute, and still, he endured, holding the flame of the matches clumsily to the bark that would not light readily because his own burning hands were in the way, absorbing most of the flame. At last, when he could endure no more, he jerked his hands apart. The blazing matches fell sizzling into the snow, but the birch bark was alight. He began laying dry grasses and the tiniest twigs on the flame. He could not pick and choose, for he had to lift the fuel between the heels of his hands. Small pieces of rotten wood and green moss clung to the twigs, and he bit them off as well he could with his teeth. He cherished the flame carefully and awkwardly. It meant life, and it must not perish. The withdrawal of blood from the surface of his body now made him begin to shiver, and he grew more awkward. A large piece of green moss fell squarely on the little fire. He tried to poke it out with his fingers, but his shivering frame made him poke too far, and he disrupted the nucleus of the little fire, the burning grasses and tiny twigs separating and scattering. He tried to poke them together again, but in spite of the tenseness of the effort, his shivering got away with him, and the twigs were hopelessly scattered. Each twig gushed a puff of smoke and went out. The fire provider had failed. As he looked apathetically about him, his eyes chanced on the dog, sitting across the ruins of the fire from him, in the snow, making restless, hunching movements, slightly lifting one forefoot and then the other, shifting its weight back and forth on them with wistful eagerness. The sight of the dog put a wild idea into his head. He remembered the tale of the man caught in a blizzard who killed a steer and crawled inside the carcass, and so was saved. He would kill the dog and bury his hands in the warm body until the numbness went out of them. Then, he could build another fire. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, but in his voice was a strange note of fear that frightened the animal, who had never known the man to speak in such a way before. Something was the matter, and its suspicious nature sensed a danger. It knew not what danger, but somewhere, somehow, in its brain, arose an apprehension of the man. It flattened its ears down at the sound of the man's voice, and its restless, hunching movements and the lifting and shifting of its forefeet became more pronounced. But it would not come to the man. He got on his hands and knees and crawled toward the dog. This unusual posture again excited suspicion, and the animal sidled mincingly away. The man sat up in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens by means of his teeth and got upon his feet. He glanced down at first in order to assure himself that he was really standing up, for the absence of sensation in his feet left him unrelated to the earth. His erect position in itself started to drive the webs of suspicion from the dog's mind, and when he spoke, with the sound of the whiplash in his voice, the dog rendered its customary allegiance and came to him. As it came within reaching distance, the man lost control. His arms flashed out to the dog, and he experienced genuine surprise when he discovered that his hands could not clutch, that there was neither bend nor feeling in the fingers. He had forgotten for the moment that they were frozen, and that they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could get away, he encircled its body with his arms. He sat down in the snow and in this fashion held the dog while it snarled and whined and struggled. But it was all he could do, hold its body encircled in his arms and sit there. He realized that he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his helpless hands, he could neither draw nor hold his sheath knife or throttle the animal. He released it, and it plunged wildly away with tail between its legs and still snarling. It halted 40 feet away and surveyed him curiously, with ears sharply pricked forward. The man looked down at his hands in order to locate them and found them hanging on the ends of his arms. It struck him as curious that one should have to use his eyes in order to find out where his hands were. He began threshing his arms back and forth, beating the mittened hands against his sides. He did this for 5 minutes, violently, and his heart pumped enough blood up to the surface to put a stop to his shivering. But no sensation was aroused in the hands. He had an impression that they hung like weights on the ends of his arms, but when he tried to run the impression down, he could not find it. A certain fear of death, dull and oppressive, came to him. This fear quickly became poignant as he realized that it was no longer a mere matter of freezing his fingers and toes, or of losing his hands and feet, but that it was a matter of life and death, with the chances against him. This threw him into a panic, and he turned and ran up the creek bed along the old dim trail. The dog joined in behind and kept up with him. He ran blindly without intention, in fear such as he had never known in his life. Slowly, as he plowed and floundered through the snow, he began to see things again. The banks of the creek, the old timber jams, the leafless aspens, and the sky. The running made him feel better. He did not shiver. Maybe, if he ran on, his feet would thaw out. And, anyway, if he ran far enough, he would reach camp and the boys. Without doubt, he would lose some fingers and toes and some of his face, but the boys would take care of him and save the rest of him when he got there. And at the same time, there was another thought in his mind that said he would never get to the camp and the boys, that it was too many miles away, that the freezing had too great a start on him, and that he would soon be stiff and dead. This thought he kept in the background and refused to consider. Sometimes it pushed itself forward and demanded to be heard, but he thrust it back and strove to think of other things. It struck him as curious that he could run at all on feet so frozen that he could not feel them when they struck the earth and took the weight of his body. He seemed to himself to skim along above the surface and have no connection with the earth. Somewhere he had once seen a winged Mercury, and he wondered if Mercury felt as he felt when skimming over the earth. His theory of running until he reached camp and the boys had one flaw in it. He lacked the endurance. Several times he stumbled and finally he tottered, crumpled up and fell. When he tried to rise, he failed. He must sit and rest, he decided, and next time he would merely walk and keep on going. As he sat and regained his breath, he noted that he was feeling quite warm and comfortable. He was not shivering, and it even seemed that a warm glow had come to his chest and trunk. And yet, when he touched his nose or cheeks, there was no sensation. Running would not thaw them out, nor would it thaw out his hands and feet. Then the thought came to him that the frozen portions of his body must be extending. He tried to keep this thought down, to forget it, to think of something else. He was aware of the panicky feeling that it caused, and he was afraid of the panic. But the thought asserted itself and persisted until it produced a vision of his body totally frozen. This was too much, and he made another wild run along the trail. Once he slowed down to a walk, but the thought of the freezing extending itself made him run again. And all the time the dog ran with him, at his heels. When he fell down a second time, it curled its tail over its forefeet and sat in front of him, facing him, curiously eager and intent. The warmth and security of the animal angered him, and he cursed it till it flattened down its ears appealingly. This time, the shivering came more quickly upon the man. He was losing in his battle with the frost. It was creeping into his body from all sides. The thought of it drove him on, but he ran no more than 100 feet when he staggered and pitched headlong. It was his last panic. When he had recovered his breath and control, he sat up and entertained in his mind the conception of meeting death with dignity. However, the conception did not come to him in such terms. His idea of it was that he had been making a fool of himself, running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Such was the simile that occurred to him. Well, he was bound to freeze anyway, and he might as well take it decently. With this newfound peace of mind came the first glimmerings of drowsiness. A good idea, he thought, to sleep off to death. It was like taking an anesthetic. Freezing was not so bad as people thought. There were lots worse ways to die. He pictured the boys finding his body the next day. Suddenly, he found himself with them, coming along the trail and looking for himself. And, still with them, he came around a turn in the trail and found himself lying in the snow. He did not belong with himself anymore, for even he was out of himself, standing with the boys and looking at himself in the snow. It certainly was cold, was his thought. When he got back to the States, he could tell the folks what real cold was. He drifted on from this to a vision of the old-timer on Sulphur Creek. He could see him quite clearly, warm and comfortable and smoking a pipe. "You were right, old hoss. You were right," the man mumbled to the old-timer of Sulphur Creek. Then, the man drowsed off into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day drew to a close in a long, slow twilight. There were no signs of a fire to be made, and, besides, never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the twilight drew on, its eager yearning for the fire mastered it, and, with a great lifting and shifting of forefeet, it whined softly, then flattened its ears down in anticipation of being chided by the man. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog whined loudly, and still later, it crept close to the man and caught the scent of death. This made the animal bristle and back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leapt and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then, it turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew. where there were other food providers and providers of fire.
The Fool. Stepping off the gravel path onto the grass, I stopped to let my eyes take in the trees draped in vines all around me. Pedro, my youngest grandchild, takes my hand and helps me hobble over to a small stone bench almost hidden under the low-hanging boughs of a cedar tree growing beside a little brook at the edge of the clearing. I'm not as fast as I once was, but today I move even slower. I want to savor this moment. Every step, every leaf, every bird that sings joyously in the distance. I want to etch it all, every detail into my memory, and carry it with me always. But time is cruel. We reach the bench too quickly. Pedro takes my elbow to steady me when I move to sit, but I still groan and flop the last few inches. Oof! Don't ever get old, Pedro. I make it look fun, but it is not so easy as you think. Mama. His dark eyes twinkle, just like his father's. Are you certain you don't want me to stay with you? I shake my head. Some things I could never explain, even if I wanted to. Not to him especially. Oh, he's a good boy, very good to bring me here, halfway across the world with no explanation, but he would never understand this. Never. And I don't have the words to try. All his life I have guided him, taught him, but this lesson he must learn on his own. You go get some of that American food that makes you fat. Take your time, but be back before supper, huh? But Pedro doesn't leave. Instead, he sticks both his hands in his back pockets and stares down at his feet. Mama, I don't have to leave you here alone. Not here. Not in this garden of the dead. A smile tickles my cheek. That's my Pedro. Such a kind boy. So caring. My precious Nino. I reach out my hand and pat his smooth cheek, like I did when he was little. Don't worry about me. I nod at the path. Go, take Marina and little Paco and do as I say. Pedro covers my hand with his and kisses my palm. Yes, Mama. It takes him a long time to pull away, even longer to slump down the path to the place where it vanishes behind the curtain of vines, where he stops to look back at me. I'll be back in 1 hour. 2, I shout, and hold up my fingers for him to see. If you come back in 1, I swear by Santos. Don't swear here. He cuts me off, waving his hand at the closest headstone. We're in a cemetery. My lips push together without me wanting them to. Don't you dare lecture me, Pedro V. Hey, Mama, calm down. He laughs. Anything you want. Just no hurricanes today, eh? He shakes his head and makes a show of checking his watch. In 2 hours, I'll be here. With that, he disappears behind the vines so quickly, I do not even get the chance to argue. 2 hours. I take a deep breath, press my palm against the cool, flat surface of the bench, and gaze out across the tops of the headstones. Early morning mist hangs heavy between the trees, broken only by the soft rays of sunshine peeking in through holes in their canopies. Heaven on earth. I close my eyes and drink in the dampness of the air on my skin, the scent of cedar all around me, the soft, soothing babble of the brook on my back. It took me a lifetime to finally come to this place, to pay the debt I owe, but I could not have imagined a better resting place for a man, a fool like him. My thoughts drift back to the day that we met so long ago. My chin shakes as the memory takes hold, but I don't even bother trying to fight the tears when they come. He deserves my tears, and so much more. I was young, too young to remember when we moved to Ukraine, but I do know why. Papa said that when the Russians left, Ukraine was the new America, the land of opportunity. He hoped that the new excitement over their independence meant a new frontier, a way for him to make his fortune, to give Mama and me a better life than the one we had in Mexico. And so we left and set out to chase Papa's dream. Not the tiny flat I remember from those days, back when I was a little Nina. A little bird lands on the branch over my head, drawing me back to the present. He chirps a shrill, happy tune, flaps his bright blue wings, and hops sideways to peek at me around his perch. He's too bright to be real, more like the little bird's mama used to hang on the tree at Christmas. I sigh. Oh, that those happy times could have lasted forever, the years before the Russians invaded, and that last Christmas especially. Mama sat in her pink stuffed chair and played old hymns on Grandmama's magic flute. Silent Night, Good King Wenceslas, the First Noel. Magic. I sniff. I was already too old to believe in such things, but in her hands it seemed like magic. I would sit cross-legged at her feet, elbows on knees, chin in my hands, mesmerized. The lights on the tree danced with the music. The snow outside fell slower, and the warmth of the music spread through my chest. It was magical. Even the smoke rising from Papa's pipe took on a peaceful, lazy air. The bird tips his head as though studying me, and so I do the same. Hello, little one. Have you come to give me company? He flits to another branch further away, but even half hidden among the branches, his bright blue almost glows, almost as bright as the procession of the three kings we watched on television that year, the year the bombs fell. I shake my head. It is such a silly thing. Even all these years later, I still remember every detail. The taste of shattered concrete, its grit in my teeth, the look on Papa's face when he shoved my arms through the straps on my school pack and told me to run for the door. The way his voice shook when he told me that everything would be okay. I can still see Mama's head turn in slow motion when she looked through the window. The fear that flashed across her eyes, the way they widened, and the blinding white flash that ended in utter darkness. I do not know how long it lasted. What is time to the dead? How does one measure the passing of eternity? And that is what I remember. Darkness without time, silence without waking, and then pinpricks of light. The distant rumble of moving rocks, and the woman's voice called from somewhere far away. A girl! She's alive! The darkness swirled and the pricks of light widened and two blue eyes blinked behind a shield of clear plastic. Don't worry, you're safe now. Her voice cracked. And the pain. Yes, I remember the pain very well. It rippled down my spine like liquid fire when she slid her arms underneath my body. It stabbed deep in my chest when I coughed, burned my throat when I screamed, Mama and Papa. And the terrible pain only silence can bring, when they did not answer. The woman lifted my body from the rubble and turned to hand me to another, a man in another bright orange coat like hers. My head flopped to the side, and that is when I saw her. Mama, her arms and legs flung across the rubble in strange angles, her head broken open like an egg beside a pan, leaking out onto the cushion of her chair. A whimper leaked from my mouth and I turned away. It was not real, a terrible nightmare. If I could only wake, everything would be okay. But then I saw him, Papa, not beside Mama, but above me, hanging from the ceiling by a steel rod poking out of his chest, his mouth open, his eyes staring at me, through me, thick blood dangling from his lips like stalactites in a cave. A broken screech flew from my lips, small at first, then ear-splitting as my mind began to understand what my eyes were seeing. Idiot! The woman screamed and snatched me away from the man. Don't look, she whispered softly in my ear as she held me close, trying to cover my face with her chest. Close your eyes. Something inside me broke. I clawed at the woman's mask like a wild animal, screaming, crying, Mama, Papa. More hands grabbed me, but I kept fighting. I couldn't leave them. Not there. Not like that. It's okay. You're safe. Everything will be fine. Lies. Mom and Papa were dead. I was young then, but not a fool. Nothing would ever be okay again. I wanted to die there, with them. I screamed, I begged, I bit, punched, clawed, and kicked. But it did not matter what I did or what I said. Inch by inch, the woman and her people were pulling me away. I could slow them down perhaps, but I was not strong enough to fight them off. And that's when I saw it. Mama's flute, laying there in the dust, in the broken rubble of my home. I could not leave it there. I had to take it. Just this small piece to have with me always. I wriggled an arm free of their grasp, grabbed the woman's hair behind her ear, and pulled her face to mine. The flute. Give me Mama's flute and I won't fight anymore. Please. I pleaded through the sobs. I promise. The woman pried my hand from her hair. Her eyes followed mine to the flute and she nodded. My bird friend drops down to an old weathered gravestone, bounces to the stone behind, and pecks at its rounded top. His every movement, so carefree, even among the dead, I can't look away. He tips his head like he wants me to follow, then hops back to the stone behind with a string of loud chirps. All right, Nino, I'm coming. My knees ache as I struggle to my feet, but I am not so frail as my grandson thinks. I walk fine on my own. Even so, after only a few steps, my knee complains and I lean against the headstone to wait for it to grow quiet once more. I glance over at my friend sitting there on the next headstone, watching me in silence. We can't all be birds. I smirk, happy my grandson is not here to see me talking to this little one. And flitting about is not for old ladies, I think. Flapping his wings, he chirps a soothing long string of notes he hasn't sung before. Not since I've been here anyway. But it is a strange melody, one I know well, but I have not heard in a very long time. One that holds my heart and always has. Without meaning to, my hand drops to my leg, my fingers feeling for the flute inside my dress pocket. Now where did you hear that song, I wonder? I bend over, studying his bright plumage, blue with brown wings near his shoulders that fade back to blue near the tips. I don't know what kind of bird he is. We don't have his like back home. But something in the way he moves, the way he watches me, something in the eye seems just as familiar as his song. I don't remember much color in the days after Mama and Papa died. No details. Mostly I remember the doctors prodding and poking me all over like a pincushion. And the questions, endless questions, never asked by the same person, but always the same. What is your name? Where are you from? Do you have family? Yes. My voice squeaked every time. Papa was from Spain. I remembered he had a sister there, in Barcelona, Diana Villagran Munoz, and her husband Fernando. But I only knew her from photographs. They did not speak much, not even when we returned to Europe. Good, they would say as they wrote this down, all of them, as if it was scripted. Do you know how to contact them? Phone number, email, address? I would shake my head and stare at my shoes until they cleared their throat and said, Don't worry, we'll find them. The first time I believed them, but after the fourth, not really. I would tug at the straps of my backpack and follow the nudge on my shoulder that guided me out of the room. I lost count how many times this played out. Then I was loaded onto a bus with many other children, and then a train headed to Prague. To safety, they said. A herd of children moved here and there, all together in a bunch, like sheep. All with the same sad eyes, all with the plodding steps of people with broken souls. I remember only hollow faces, not individuals, not names. We did not look at one another. We did not speak. We did not want to see the pain in another's eyes or hear their stories. Stories we knew we all shared. In Prague, our shepherd, a younger woman with tired eyes who did not tell us her name, herded us from the train. She lined us up on the platform beside the train, with me at the back. After checking her list to make certain we were all there, she turned to the crowd pressing in against the barricade and sighed. All of you hold hands and do not let go until I say. Swallowing, I reached out for the boy ahead of me. He only met my eyes for a moment before snatching my hand and looking away. The woman glanced back at their line of sheep, warned us once more not to let go, and pulled us into the mass of people filling the station. If I live to be 1,000, I will never forget the feel of that place, the coldness. No color at all, anywhere. Mothers, children, old men, some with bandages, some on crutches, but all with the same hollow eyes. All with their shoulders bent low, shuffling this way and that, as if carrying some terrible unseen weight. All shades of gray. Our shepherd pulled us through the crowd, past the gate to a brick wall, where she stopped, pushed herself to her tiptoes and stared out into the crowd. Damn it! She lowered herself back on her heels, shaking her head. Idiot! I told him the west gate. Turning herself to us, she pulled her bottom lip between her teeth as if thinking hard. Then her eyes narrowed angrily. You, sit here, backs against the wall, and do not move until I get back. She was leaving us. A knot stuck in my throat as my fingers probed the holes in Mama's flute, but I sat down on the floor as I was told. Our shepherd waited until we were all seated, then turned and vanished into the crowd of people. To find the man in charge of the orphanage, I thought. My head drooped. They would not even look for my family. It did not matter. Mama and Papa were dead. And I wanted to die, to join them. Wherever it was the dead go. That is a nice flute, a man's voice said to me. I glanced up at him and pulled Mama's flute tighter against my chest. He spoke in Russian, but the words sounded strange in his mouth. And his clothes too looked out of place. A bright blue shirt with buttons, a brown vest and pants. I swallowed. My hands started sweating. Whoever this man was, he was certainly not Russian. May I see it? He asked. My eyes narrowed, but there was something in his voice that was different than the other grown-ups. Something kinder, gentler. For a moment I considered. Then I shook my head. He did not know what it was I held in my hands. Mama's heart, her soul. The only part of her I still had. My eyes burned, my vision blurred, and my chin trembled, but I did not look away. His eyes softened then, and his lips curled on the edges into a sad sort of smile. I understand. It is a magic flute. I still don't know why, whether it was the color of his clothes, the tone of his voice, or the way his kind eyes twinkled, but I glanced down at Mama's flute and my fingers relaxed. It's not magic. Magic is not real. Oh, but it is. He squatted down in front of me. Magic is very real. He reached into his jacket pocket. Here, I will show you. He pulled out a roll of money and made a show of counting off 500 euros. How about I give you this to hold? That way, you can be sure I will give you back your flute. I looked into his eyes, one bluish, the other more green, and then down at Mama's flute. I needed to believe in magic. In something, in anything. I would have given anything to make the color come back, to make the pain go away, for Mama and Papa to leave again. Shaking, I held out my empty hand. You promise you will give it back? He nodded and laid the money in my palm. Only then did I hold out Mama's flute. He took it gently, ran its length down the center of his palm, and flipped it over, resting a finger in each of the 6 holes. This has very strong magic. He sighed, closing his eyes. Love, sacrifice, and memory. His eyes cracked open. Watch carefully and you will see it. He stood up, put his lips to the end, and started to play. Quietly, slowly. At first nothing happened, but then those closest to him began to stare. His song grew louder, faster. The high notes bounced like rabbits in the field, and as more people turned to watch, his feet jumped too, in time with the notes. Soon the entire train station was watching him. "Stop that noise!" A hunched old woman in a headscarf with sad eyes shouted. But the man, flinging his knees and elbows this way and that, danced right up to her and with a quick high-pitched whistle, waggled his eyebrows and kissed her cheek. Her face went scarlet. "Fool!" she laughed, shooing him away. Everyone laughed. He jumped back. His song grew even happier, his feet kicking wildly as people moved to give him space. I laughed at the spectacle he had become, the man in silly clothes dancing like a drunkard for all to see, with Mama's flute whistling like a flock of sparrows in the spring. But then I noticed the red of a dress here, the bright yellow of a hat there. Color had returned. Life to pale faces, light pricked into darkened eyes. All from watching him. And on he danced. He jumped on the backs of benches, spun on the turnstiles, until all the station was clapping in time with his song. Laughing. Everyone laughing. A lone whining note sent tingles down my arms. My eyes jerked from the fool to another older man stepping out of the crowd with a violin tucked under his neck. The fool leapt from the top of the barricade to stand beside him. And oh, the music! They played together as if they were brothers. The air itself smelled sweeter. The wounds of the injured did not seem to hurt so badly. They whistled and stomped in time with the music, forgetting to be sad and in pain. And so did I. I don't remember exactly when it happened. One moment I was sitting on the floor, and the next, there I was, on my feet, spinning, laughing, dancing, drunk on joy and happiness, and all from Mama's flute. A young woman pushed out of the crowd, beside the man with the violin, lifted the hem of her skirt to show her feet, and began to dance. Her feet moved so fast I did not notice Mama's flute had gone quiet. Not until a tug on my shoulder pulled my attention away from them to the fool at my elbow. "You see?" He held out Mama's flute to me as if it was a wizard's wand. "It has magic to mend broken spirits, to make old men young again. Magic enough to change the world." My eyes traced the familiar lines of the flute as I stood there, listening to the fiddler play, the clapping, and the laughter. Mama's flute hadn't changed, of course. There was no glow shining out of the holes, no sparkles. It did not tingle when I stretched out my hand and pulled it from his fingers. But I could see it now, the magic it held. I saw it in the same way one sees the wind by watching the trees, in the people all around me. I could hear it in their voices, their laughter. I could feel its warmth burning in my own heart. And it was that warmth that heated my palm when I took it from his hand and closed my eyes. It was that warmth that burned this memory forever into my mind. I knew then what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be like him, this fool. I wanted to play magical notes and chase away the darkness. "Teach me," I gasped and opened my eyes. "Teach me this magic." My words were only a breath. For a moment I wasn't sure he heard me over the noise, but then his left eyebrow raised. "Are you certain, little one? Once you know a thing, it cannot be unknown. And there is a cost. Always there is a cost." It did not matter. I would give anything to be able to do this, to turn misery into laughter. "Teach me," I begged. "Please." "I do not have the time," he said. Tears stung my eyes and my shoulders grew heavy, but he did not look away. "However, I will give you a start. People see with their hearts and act out what is inside them, darkness and light." He bent down, bracing his hands on his knees. "People do not see what is right before their eyes, or all their hearts set into motion. But magic is not rare. It is everywhere, in everything. You can see it in the beauty of a sunrise, smell it in the scent of baking bread, feel it in the air before a storm and the softness of a baby's cheek. Magic lives in anything that grabs the soul and changes the hearts. And so, music is but one path of many. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he reached out to tap his finger against my chest. This is what your mother taught you when you were very young, though you didn't know it. I did not understand. Mama did not know magic. He stared at me for a moment, then eyes twinkling. Do not forget this day, little one, the day you became aware. He glanced over his back at the people cheering the violinist and girl dancing to his music. But for now, know you are a warrior, and from now on darkness will be your enemy. Always, until the day you lay down your sword. It is a long battle, and never forget, the greatest weapon of all is love. Death has silence, but love has a song all its own magic. And silence ends when there is music. Don't ever be afraid to play the fool, dear one. A loud whistle drew my eyes to the dancing girl, just as the old woman he had kissed lifted the hem of her dress and joined the dance. I could not help but laugh at her smile, the way it pushed all her wrinkles back like a curtain, and when I turned back to the man, he was gone. And there I was. Mama's flute in one hand, 500 euros in the other, along with a ticket stub tucked in between. That I do not think he knew was there, with his name printed on it. Cameron H. Smith. Shaking off the memory, I slipped the flute out of its pocket, pressed the end to my lips, and my little bird friend tips his head. I do not know how many lives Cameron changed that day with his song, but I never forgot the tune that chased away the darkness so long ago. The song that still flows from my heart, the song my bird friend sang a moment ago, the song I start to play now. The Fool's Jig, as I learned years later when I learned more of the magic of music, living with my aunt and uncle in Barcelona. My bird friend flaps his wings as I play the first measure, but then he opens his beak and joins me. Not the same tune he sung before, and not the notes I'm playing now. He sings notes he should not, cannot know. The harmony. The sound of it chases all the feeling from my fingers. I fumble the next few notes. He jumps closer, inches from my face, tipping his head this way and that as if he's trying to decide what is wrong. One eye blue, the other green. My heart stops. The flute slips from my lips. No, I shake my head. It can't be. I am an old woman. I'm losing my mind seeing things that are not real. After a few deep breaths, my hands still. I touch the flute to my mouth and continue to play, but my breathing won't steady. I can't hold the notes. My friend flits back a row to a smaller headstone and pecks at its top. But it is not the bird that puts lightning in my veins. Not this time. It's the name etched into the stone. Cameron Smith. Clutching the flute to my chest, I stumble forward and trace my finger along each line. I was very young that day in Prague. It took many years before I was able to find out where he lived. Many more I spent living my own life. I finished college, became a member of the Philharmonic Orchestra in Vienna. I fell in love, married, and raised a family. There were wars, pandemics, food shortages, riots, and all manner of tragedy and darkness. But never did I forget that day. Never did I forget him, the fool Cameron, and what he said to me about the darkness, the silence. Always did I meet it with my sword, my flute in hand. Always did I strike at it with my music. In hospitals, in parks, concert halls, and on street corners. Anywhere the darkness lurked. Anywhere I found people with broken hearts. And always the darkness fled before the light. Hard men in prison cried bitter tears when I played. Anguished scowls of despair turned to smiles. Shouts of anger changed to laughter. And while I could not defeat the evil behind it all, I stood my ground and fought every battle well. just as I learned Cameron had. Pressure builds behind my nose and tears sting my eyes, blurring his name on the stone. I knew he never married, that he had no children. His name will not be remembered, but what he did that day will never die. Prague will remember him. Always. They made a festival in your honor. The Day of the Fool. I mean to say more, but my voice won't come. I fall to my knees in the grass, covering his body, tears streaming down my cheeks, unable to breathe. I should have come to him when he was alive. I should have written him, told him how much he changed the world, how he changed me. Now it is too late. Years too late. A soft chirp pulls my gaze to my friend, watching from the top of the stone. I take a deep, shuddering breath and wipe my nose on my sleeve. How do you thank a dead man, Niño? One who has given so much and taken nothing in return. He taps the stone 3 times, almost like a conductor, and chirps a new song, one I have never heard before. A peaceful melody. Long, slow, and beautiful. He hangs on the low notes in a lingering bravado, freezing the blood in my veins, and then he slips into high pitches that send tingles up my arms. Without thinking, I press Mama's flute to my mouth and mimic his song. We play in unison. Me, Mama's flute, filling the air with magic. My head spins, all full of cotton, and he with his body low, looking very much like a patient tutor. For 2 rounds we do these, and then his voice breaks away from my playing. He drops tone and rises again, not with me anymore, but in harmony. Perfect harmony. The hair on my back and my neck prickles. The sound soaks beneath my skin, deep and soothing. Magical. It's only then my ears open to the sounds all around me. The frogs croaking in the pond like cellos, the chime like a trickle of the stream on the stones, the crickets and wind, all joined together in symphony. It's the most beautiful music I've ever heard. I don't ever want it to stop. I want to stay here forever, in peace, surrounded by this music, by this magical melody. My fingers cool, their warmth floating away with the music. My hands miss the next note as my hands fall. My head slumps back against the stone behind me, and the flute slips from my grip. But the music doesn't stop. I hear it louder now, more clearly. Oh, the music, that beautiful music. I close my eyes and just listen to the music of the frogs, the birds, the trees, the earth itself. I think about every song I played, how it changed people, how it made old men young and women smile. And I know what Cameron said to me all those years ago was right. Magic is everywhere, in everything, always. And now that I am not playing, I can feel it. Its warmth all around me in the mist, the breeze, and something else hiding behind the music. I tip my head back, probing the sounds with my ears, and I hear them, whispering from the shadows between the notes. Mama, Papa, and my husband, all singing silently in the magic behind the music, behind everything. Cameron's voice whispers from my memory. The greatest magic of all is love. Love has its own song, and silence dies when there is music. Do not ever be afraid to play the fool. Forcing my eyes to open, I glance down at Mama's flute lying beside me in the grass, my sword against the darkness. I understand now what he meant when he told me not to be afraid to play the fool. And I have. All this time I thought I stood alone, but they have been there all along, all of them, singing to me, loving me, guiding me. It's so obvious now. I can't believe I did not hear them sooner. Mama? Pedro's voice calls, but it's like listening to a dream when you're half awake. Where are you? I glance up at my little bird, but I see him now, Cameron, standing behind the stone. His outline waves like a tattered flag in the wind, but he's there, leaned down on top of his headstone, resting his chin on his folded hands exactly where the bird was, smiling at me. "Well done," he chuckles. "Well done indeed." He glances down at Mama's flute, then back at me. "But it is time to lay down your sword. Let another take it up." "Who?" I ask. But even before the words leave my lips, Pedro's panicked voice calls, "Mama, where are you?" My mouth falls open. "Pedro. He means Pedro. Please. No, I cannot leave. Not yet. Not like this. I cannot do that to my grandson. I will not. Here." I shout with all my strength, but my voice comes as only a whisper. He won't hear me. I need to get up. Bracing myself for the familiar pain, I pull my knees to chest, jump to my feet, and freeze. There is no pain, no difficulty at all. I move like when I was young. "No," I gasp and lift my hands, but these hands I have not seen since I was 20. And not even then, I think. There are no hard calluses from years of practice, no scars or blemishes on the backs of my hands and forearms. Only perfect, smooth skin. "No," I shout. My hands fall to my sides. I catch a glimpse of the old woman I was, slumped in a pile at my feet, and a lead ball forms in my throat. "I will not do this to him," I scream, shaking as I meet Cameron's stare. "Put me back." His mouth twists into a sad-looking smirk. "I'm sorry, I can't. I don't have that power. I am only a fellow servant with—" "Mama!" Pedro shrieks as he rounds the stone, cutting Cameron off. "Mama, wake up!" His face ties into a knot. He falls to his knees beside my body. "Mama!" He cradles my wizened face between his hands, but my head rolls back against the stone, limp. He catches it and holds my forehead to his, but his chin trembles. Tears fill his eyes, and a low, deep moan stumbles from his lips. My chest aches. He's my baby. My eyes burn. I throw my arms around him to comfort him, but my hug passes through him. I try again and again, screaming, crying, dying all over again. Pulling my hair, I kneel beside him, listening to him trying to fight the sobs ripping at his heart and mine. My grandson, my precious niño, he is hurting terribly, and I cannot so much as hold him. This is hell. It has to be, to watch those you love suffer and not able to help. But then, over the sound of my screams, the ache in my chest, Cameron sings. Not with words, not even with sounds, with love, with spirit. My tears stop. It's a slow, sad song I know well. A wordless groan I remember feeling long ago as a little niña in church. And just like that, I am back in the Prague, watching the darkness flee before his light. Pedro's sobs slow. He tips my head forward, kisses my forehead, and closes my eyes with his thumbs. "Goodbye, Mama," he gasps and shifts back on his haunches. "I love—" His voice trails off as he wipes his nose on his sleeve, but then his eyes flit to the flute lying in the grass beside my body. He stares at it for a moment, shaking his head before he picks it up. "You and your music." He flops back against Cameron's stone, sniffs, and presses the end to his lips. "Then I will play a goodbye song to chase away the darkness."
The following is a faithful reenactment that is based on a series of audio tape recordings, transcriptions of radio communications, and a copy of an uncensored police report I obtained from a source that, for reasons of personal safety, must remain anonymous. I've also included excerpts from an emotionally charged interview with the widow of a man who witnessed the events in question. The existence of these recordings and transcripts has been officially and repeatedly denied by the National Park Service, the FBI, local law enforcement, and a number of officials representing the U.S. military. However, despite the official stance that the incident was an elaborate hoax, The audio recorded that night by Park Ranger Matthew Golding was leaked by an unidentified source in the fall of 2010, along with the radio transcripts and the police report. The forbidden files were uploaded to an infamous website known for hosting controversial material. The illicit materials disappeared from the site in short order, but they have periodically resurfaced on other file-sharing websites over the years. If one is persistent enough, it is possible to find them. But if you do, be prepared to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. People who obtain these files have a tendency to disappear. In the interest of staying both alive and well, I have chosen to omit the name of the national park where the incident occurred. I also took the liberty of altering both the names and exact ages of all parties involved. The location will be referred to as X National Park, and the witnesses shall be named as follows. Matthew Golding, 31, a National Park Service forest ranger and law enforcement officer. Jillian Bridgemore, 36, an NPS ranger, law enforcement officer, and a respected authority in wildland fire suppression. Nicholas Fazio, 53, a trusted volunteer who was manning the radio at the base of operations that evening. Maria Fazio, 48, a laborer at a local manufacturing facility and the wife of Nicholas Fazio. And Louis Delacroix, 42, a veteran fire lookout who was serving his 20th season in the watchtower. 3 people went missing that night, never to be seen again, and a 4th was found dead in his home only 3 days later. Maria Fazio discovered the body of her husband slumped over the kitchen table, his hand still wrapped around his coffee mug as his blood soaked into the morning newspaper. He had been shot in the back of the head with a .40 caliber firearm. The coroner initially stated that his death was a homicide, but the ruling was quickly changed to suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Maria Fazio was adamant that her husband had never owned a handgun. According to the uncensored police report, no weapon was found at the scene. So, who murdered Nicholas Fazio, and why was his murder covered up by the police?
I've never seen anything like it. They're ants to them. To get out of there, but my compass was spinning in circles. I saw them floating over the treetops. Screaming. Dinky, I saw them screaming in the light.
Calm down, Lou. Listen, we're gonna get you out of there. We're gonna, just tell me again where...
Holy God, they're coming. Look to the southeast, do you see it? It's just gliding over the treetops like... Oh, do you see it?
Hey, what? Louis, what is that? I can see, there's... And now it's changing colors. I lost sight of it. What do you see on your end? What's happening?
They're coming for me. Oh, I'm scared, Nicky.
You've got a shotgun in there. Use it if you have to, Lou. Don't think twice about it.
They don't care about no shotgun. Before they get me, I'm telling you right now, I will blow my goddamn head off.
My husband didn't own a gun. I would never allow one in the house. I mean, even if he did have a gun, how could he shoot himself like that, twice, in the back of the head? Yeah, they left that part out. He was shot twice, not once. He couldn't have done that to himself. Didn't make any sense. Yeah, after the ruling came out, I hounded them every damn day. Every day, I would call them no word of a lie every single day. I would go down there in person sometimes, and I demand they reopen the investigation. I mean, I even started calling the office of the governor. I wrote him letters. You know what they said to me? They said, stop calling. It isn't going to bring him back. Yeah, I want everyone to know they said that to me. The office of the governor said that to a grieving widow. Make sure that gets in there.
I will. Maria, why do you think they changed the cause of death in the coroner's report?
They were scared. And everyone I talked to, they sounded like they were afraid. I could hear it in their voices, so I stopped calling them. I mean, there was no point. No one was going to tell me the truth. And if they did, they'd end up like Nick. They'd be killed.
Shortly after 9 p.m., on a clear night in August of 2006, veteran fire lookout Louis Delacroix radioed the base of operations with a startling observation. An unidentified flying object had dropped from the darkening skies and landed in the woods roughly a mile north of the watchtower.
You really didn't see it? Touched down about 3 miles southeast of you, about a mile north of the tower. You didn't see nothing at all?
Negative. I didn't see anything unusual to the southeast. Was it a meteor? You know, a shooting star or something like that?
No, wasn't no meteor. I've seen a few meteors over the years, and it wasn't like that. It didn't streak across the sky, and it wasn't fast. It came down in a slow, controlled descent, nice and steady. I watched it fly parallel to the treetops, cruising along at maybe 20 miles an hour, and it dropped out of sight. I don't know, it wasn't a flare, and it weren't a parachute. I don't know what to tell you. I couldn't identify it.
Wow, that's really weird.
You're telling me? I have never seen anything like that before, and I've been watching the skies for 20 years. Can you maybe send someone out here?
I'll get a hold of Matt and Jillian.
Oh, I don't know, Nicky. I think we got ourselves a UFO out here. I've never seen anything like that before in my entire life.
What do you mean, like a flying saucer or something? Come on, you can't be serious.
I saw what I saw. I don't know what to say. I'm a little freaked out, Nicky. Tell him to get out here quick. Just tell him it's an emergency.
Nick didn't come home that night. I tried to call him at least a dozen times, but he wouldn't answer the phone. I called the police and asked them to go check on him, and they told me, "Don't worry, everything's fine." And I asked them, "How do you know that? You didn't even go out there yet." They just kept saying that everything was fine at the base and I should just go to bed.
What time did your husband come home?
He didn't get in until 2 o'clock the next afternoon. I was worried sick. He looked so tired, and there was something else too. Like, he had this blank look in his eyes. I think he was in shock. I asked him what happened, and the way he stared at me made goosebumps come up on my arms. And he said, "They told me not to tell anyone, not even you."
Is this thing recording? Or do I have to... Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. This is Officer Matthew Golding speaking. It's shortly after 9 p.m. on the of August 2006. I'm standing here with Jillian Bridgemore and Louis Delacroix, and, as I said, we're standing here outside the Watchtower in National Park. Jillian and I were called out to investigate something, something very unusual that was reported by Mr. Delacroix here. Lou, can you tell us what you saw? Unusual? Yeah, you could say that.
Mr. Delacroix has requested that we document this investigation with a tape recorder he found in the Watchtower. Louis, can you tell us what you saw this evening?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Right around 9 o'clock, 2100 hours, I seen a ball of light fall from the sky. It came down about a mile from here. It was pretty big. I'd say maybe 20 feet across in diameter. It turned all kinds of different colors as it came down. One sort of just running into the next, you know? It was pulsing and, I don't know how to describe it, really. The light was just sort of pulsing, going from green to blue, red, orange, all kinds of colors. I'll go on record right now and tell you something. I've been a fire lookout for a real long time, and I've never seen anything like that.
Do you believe in that sort of thing, Mr. Delacroix? UFOs and things of that nature?
I believe what I see with my own eyes, and I am telling you, I seen a ball of light come down from the sky. It flew over the trees in a straight, steady path for maybe 200 yards, and then it just dropped out of sight. I'm not saying it's aliens or something, but, well, hell, I don't know. I can only tell you what I saw.
Matt, no offense to Lewis here, but I don't think this was much of an emergency.
Hold on just a damn minute. I am not a liar, ma'am. I'm telling you the truth. I've known Lou for a long time. If he says something landed out there in the woods, well, I believe he isn't lying to us. And we'll just say that. We might as well check it out. I am not some crazy wingnut. I saw what I saw. No, I know you aren't, Lou. Believe me, if it was anyone but you, I'd already be heading back. It's been a long day. I want to come too. I want to see it. I don't think that's a good idea.
Absolutely not.
Come on, I want to see it. I have a camera. Let me come with you.
If you fell off the back of the quad or something, I think we could be held liable. No way, we can't do that.
Please, I'm begging you over here. Come on. I want to see this thing. I want to take 100 pictures and show the whole goddamn world. I promise I will not be a pain in your ass, and I won't do anything stupid. Look, Lou, I'll be honest here. I don't think we're going to find an actual physical object from outer space in those woods. We'll take you out there, show you that nothing's there, and back to the watchtower you go.
He's not supposed to abandon his post at the tower. This is... You know what? He's your responsibility then. He can ride with you.
You're gonna see that I ain't a liar. You're gonna see that for yourself. Mark my words.
Nick didn't say much when he got in. He lay down on the couch and fell asleep. I was really worried about him. Right around 6 o'clock, I took a break from watching over him to go have a smoke, and I saw an unfamiliar vehicle parked a little ways down the street. A big black SUV with tinted windows. I felt like someone was watching me. Made me nervous. When I went back in, Nick was sitting up on the couch. He pointed to the window and said, "Are they out there?" I knew right away what he was talking about. I told him about the SUV, and his face got real pale. He started pacing around the house. He says, "They don't want me to tell anyone." Well, I grabbed him by the arm and asked him, "Tell anyone what, Nick? What happened out there last night?" And he just shook his head and whispered in my ear, "I can't say anything, they're listening." I felt the hairs raise on the back of my neck, and I grabbed a notepad and wrote, "Who's listening?" And he shook his head again and grabbed the pen out of my hand, and he wrote, "They can see us." And he ran the tap over the notepad in the kitchen sink. He wadded it up in a ball and threw it in the garbage.
Did you look for this notepad after your husband's murder?
Yes. I searched for it after they took him away. It wasn't there. I dumped the bag out on the kitchen floor and looked through all the garbage, but it just wasn't there. It was gone.
Maria, who do you believe was responsible for the death of your husband?
The real question is, who ordered his execution? Because it was an execution. My husband knew something he wasn't supposed to know. They were worried he would tell someone. That's why he wouldn't say anything. He was afraid they would find out with their surveillance equipment. He was trying to protect me.
What do you think would have happened if Nick had told you the truth?
I think you know the answer to that. One more death to these people? Our lives don't matter to people like that.
Who are you referring to when you say that? Who are they? And what are they trying to hide?
I think you already know the answer to that one, too.
Shortly after 9 p.m., Matthew Golding, Jillian Bridgemore, and Louis Delacroix left the watchtower on 2 all-terrain vehicles, following a rough trail that meanders on a northwesterly path through the forest. Before they left, Louis radioed back to base to advise Nick Fazio that the trio intended to venture out and locate the mysterious object which had descended from the sky. It was the second last transmission sent from the watchtower that evening.
Goddamn, that's something, isn't it? That's really something. You guys be careful, Lou.
Well, I just want to get some pictures, Nicky. I ain't going to walk up and touch the damn thing. We're not stupid.
Listen, Louis, jokes aside, if you find what you're looking for out there, don't get too close, you know? Be cautious. You don't know anything about it. You don't know what it is or where it came from. It could be dangerous.
I already told you I am not an idiot. Damn it, this is big, man. This is huge. We are gonna be famous. TV, talk shows, and all that jazz. Reporters.
Famous? You get a clear picture of some aliens out there, and I bet we'll all friggin' disappear. I mean it, Lou. You guys be careful.
We'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Over and out, buddy. We'll talk soon.
The time is, it's 9:24 p.m. We parked the quads on the side of the trail and went into the woods on foot. We are approximately 1 mile north of the tower, and we can see a light shining through the trees. It's... I don't know what to make of this. Jillian?
I think I should apologize to Louis over here. There's an object in the woods, about 200 or 300 yards to the west of the trail. I can't see its shape, but it's a brightly lit object, and it seems to be changing colors in a pattern. We're too far away to make out any detail, but this thing, it's pretty big. I don't know how Nick didn't see this thing. It's very bright.
I told you, I ain't a liar. No one ever called you a liar, we just didn't... Wait. What the hell is that? I can hear something. I can feel it. Like it's...
I can feel it too. Can you smell that? There's a weird smell, almost like ozone. I can taste it on my tongue.
Oh, okay, let's consider our options here. I am not sure if getting close and taking pictures is such a great idea, Lou. We should keep our distance.
Shh. Do you hear that? Something's coming this way.
Oh, shit on that. Let's go. Louis, do not leave my sight, you... Louis! Louis! Wait!
We have to go. Come on.
Okay, just a second.
A massive search operation was quickly organized to locate the missing rangers and the fire lookout, but after 9 days, the searchers were forced to throw in the towel. Every acre of the park was carefully combed for any clues that might shed some light on their fate. In the end, all they could find was a small scrap of cloth that may have come from a ranger's uniform, a single button, the tire tracks from their all-terrain vehicles, the tape recorder, and Matthew Golding's 9mm pistol. The scrap of cloth was discovered a few yards outside the burn spot. It was snagged on a low-hanging branch, affirming that at least one of the rangers came very close to the landing site. The button was on the ground nearby, partially melted. It was impossible to determine which of the missing persons these items may have belonged to, but it is almost certain they both came from a ranger's uniform. The tape recorder was laying in the burned vegetation near the edge of the eye. The outer casing of the tape recorder was badly melted, but the cassette inside proved to be largely unscathed. The discovery of the firearm occurred by pure accident. A member of the search team happened to look up at the right time, and she caught sight of a pistol dangling from a tree branch. The branch in question was 79 feet in the air. The firearm was determined to belong to Matthew Golding. Upon closer examination, the searchers made a grisly discovery. There was a crust of blackened organic material attached to the grip, which was eventually identified as being a thick layer of human skin. It appeared that Golding's weapon was torn from his grasp after being heated to searing temperatures. The weapon itself, however, appeared to have sustained only minor damage. The entire event is shrouded in mystery, but the strangest piece of the puzzle is the area known as the burn spot. The burn spot is a roughly circular patch of land where all the vegetation was seared to a crisp by an unknown source of heat. The trees along the border of the burn spot had been singed all the way up to the uppermost branches on one side, but were largely undamaged on the other side. In the middle of this 40-foot-wide patch of devastation, there was a perfect circle of bleached-out soil that was dubbed the Eye by the search team. The undergrowth located within this area hadn't been scorched, but it was uniformly crushed into the forest floor in a swirling circular pattern. The Eye reaches 12 inches deep into the soil, and it measures over 20 feet in diameter. According to the police report, the ground inside the Eye remained warm to the touch for over 72 hours. There was a quiet concern among the ranks of the search team that the area might have been irradiated, but there was no elevated levels of harmful radiation detected within either the Eye or the surrounding burn spot. It has been reported that, even years later, nothing will grow within the burn spot. Wildlife has been observed giving it a very wide berth, including birds and flying insects, who will actively change their flight path to avoid crossing through the airspace above the affected area. Unknown persons were observed taking soil and vegetation samples from the burn spot on the day after the abduction, but the results of any analysis that might have been performed on these samples remains unknown. How could it be possible to burn such a large area of dry undergrowth without sparking a raging wildfire? The entire region was in the grip of a heat wave, and there had been minimal rainfall in the weeks leading up to the incident. In those conditions, a stray ember from a campfire could easily start a devastating inferno. One can only wonder about the nature of an energy field which could accomplish such a feat, and how it might be produced, and for what purpose. No one knows the true answer beyond a select few, an anonymous and faceless cabal that protects its secrets with money, intimidation, and cold-blooded murder.
Oh, shit. Shit! Okay. I don't know what time it is. My watch stopped. Radio doesn't work either. Just a lot of static. Lou, he's gone. We lost him. There was something coming at us. I don't know. We could hear like I don't even know how to describe it.
It was a deep hum. I could hear something pushing through the undergrowth, and that humming sound. My head started to hurt. It was hard to breathe.
Lou took off in a different direction and we lost him. He's still out there somewhere.
I'm sorry, but I'm leaving right now. There's no way I'm going back out there.
We can't leave without him, Joe. Do you know how much?
We never should have brought him with us in the first place. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Whatever's out there in the woods, it's beyond us. Way beyond us. Who knows what could happen if it sees us?
Look, Jill, I have known Lou for years, and I can't do it. There's no choice.
There is a choice. I choose to go home tonight, and you should do the same. Whatever or whoever is out there, they might mean us harm and they might not. Sometimes I'll step on a bug by accident, and sometimes I do it on purpose. Either way, that bug is dead. You get what I'm saying?
We're still recording here, Jill.
I don't give a shit. You can do whatever you want, but I'm out of here.
No. Stop right there and drop the key.
Hey! What the fuck are you doing pointing your gun at me?
Put your weapon on the ground. Bear spray, knife, radio. Put everything on the ground. No! Shut up! Do not talk. Take 6 big steps backward and turn around with your hands in the air.
What are you doing? What the hell is going on here, Matt?
If you speak again, I'll kill you. Do you understand? Good. Keep your mouth shut and do as I say. Start walking.
Oh, I'm pretty much an expert by now, sure. Ask whatever you want.
Let's talk about Matthew Golding for a minute.
Well, I guess people are gonna think this is crazy, but it's all crazy, so, we know that Matthew Golding was born in 1975. He moved to the state of with his family when he was a teenager, and he started in the park in the fall of 1998. He appeared almost 8 years later on the night of what happened, and that was the last anyone ever saw of him. Are you with me so far?
Yes, ma'am. Please continue.
Well, a couple of fishermen found a skull in a ravine back in 2011. It was identified as belonging to Matthew Golding. He'd been shot in the back of the head. Now, at first they were estimating the year of his death to be sometime in 2002, but that got changed to 2006 in the report.
So, you're suggesting that Matthew died 4 years before the abduction? How is that possible? His voice can be heard numerous times in the recording.
The man you hear in the recording wasn't the real Matthew Golding. He was dead long before then. Mr. Golding was murdered and replaced with a look-alike in 2002. The man on the tape is an imposter.
Where would they find someone who could look and act so closely to the real person? And why? It's been documented that Matthew came home for the Christmas holidays every year, and even his own family didn't notice anything off about him.
There's been a lot of very strange sightings in that park over the years. Look it up for yourself. It's been going on for at least 100 years, maybe even longer. I think they've been watching the park for a very long time now, and they'll protect their secret any way they can. Now, there was a letter that Matthew wrote to his parents in March of 2001, and I've seen this letter with my own eyes, where he says he saw a strange light in the sky. He thought it was Venus at first, but it fell from the sky and landed somewhere in the park. That's what he says in the letter. He says, I thought to myself, Venus is falling. So he did see something unusual, and maybe it was more than once. Maybe he told someone about it, and they turned out to be the wrong person, you know? Maybe they were reading his mail. They can do that. They can make you disappear, and they can even replace you. They have unlimited money and resources, these people. They can do whatever they want.
What is the secret they're trying to protect?
I know what people think when you say something like this, but I do believe there are other civilizations out there, and they're much more advanced than we are. That's not the secret, though. The secret is they've been coming to our planet for a very long time. They come here for reasons we don't understand, and they do what they do, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. That's what they're trying to hide from the public, you understand. The real secret isn't that we're being, interfered with, you know? The secret is that we don't know what they want, and we're helpless to stop them.
I have one more question concerning Matthew Golding. Why do you think he recorded himself committing a felony by holding a fellow law enforcement officer hostage? You would think someone in his position would want to get rid of Jillian and Lewis without leaving any evidence behind.
Well, He wasn't worried about the tape falling into the wrong hands. He was probably going to send it straight to a lab somewhere for analysis if things had turned out the way he'd planned. He was going to kill Jillian and Lewis, no doubt about it. He wasn't going to let them get out of there alive.
It might have been better for them if he had. The final minute of the tape is absolutely terrifying. I've listened to it a dozen times, and it still makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
I feel for Jillian and Lewis, but as far as I'm concerned, that murdering son of a bitch got what he deserved, sir. He got exactly what he deserved.
There's an opening on the side. The fucking thing, it's changing all the time I mean, it's a circle, then it's like a star. Doesn't stop changing, it's... Oh, fuck. It just opened up.
What do you mean? Like a door or something?
No, it's I don't know, it's not like a door. There's... out of the opening. Oh, it hurts to look at. I don't know how. Oh, wait a minute. What's that? Shit.
What's going on? Talk to me, Lewis. What do you see?
Something just came out of there. I can't, I mean, there's more. There's even more of them. Oh my God, sweet Jesus, the way they move.
Calm down. I called the cops, so help is on the way. Just lay low, okay? Stay away from the...
They know I'm here. They know I'm talking to you.
Can they see you?
They can see everything.
The imposter, who was masquerading as Matthew Goldman, led Jillian Bridgemore through the woods for approximately 17 minutes. During that time, no audible communication between them was captured on tape. The disquieting hum that could be heard earlier in the recording reappears, and it grows steadily louder, as if Matthew and his captive were inadvertently drifting closer and closer to the object as they search for Louis Delacroix. At one point, Louis can be heard yelling their names in the background, suggesting he was in close enough proximity to the Rangers to be picked up by the cheap microphone in the tape recorder. Although these conclusions are largely speculation, they generate two very puzzling questions. How did the imposter not realize he was wandering too close to the landing site? And why didn't he answer Louis when he was obviously close enough to be heard? It can be speculated that the object in the woods was exerting some kind of temporal disturbance in the immediate area of the landing site, distorting time and space in a way that would confuse the senses. It's possible Louis was walking almost right beside them, but they were unable to see or perceive each other in any tangible manner. I think it's highly unlikely the agent posing as Matthew would knowingly approach the object, as he would have been well aware of the dangers it posed to any earthly being that might stray too close. I believe he simply became disoriented and wandered in the wrong direction, with disastrous results. Although I grieve the loss of Jillian Bridgemore, I'm afraid I have to agree with Maria Fazio concerning the fate of the murderous imposter. That son of a bitch had it coming.
I can't see. Stop right there. We have... Oh, shit. Oh, holy fuck.
Oh my God. The light.
I was in the shower when it happened. He was sitting at the table, drinking his coffee. He had the morning newspaper open in front of him. When I, got out of the shower, he was slumped over the table. His... oh, God, the blood. The newspaper was soaking up his blood.
You didn't hear any gunshots?
I thought maybe I had heard something, but it wasn't a really loud bang, you know, like the bang from a gunshot. Your guns are very loud. There's no way I wouldn't hear 2 shots over the sound of the running water, not unless the killer was using a suppressor. I've read about those things. It's not like in the movies. They changed the sound of the gunshot.
Tell me about the encounter you had after the funeral.
Well, it was about a week after the funeral, and I was just sort of moping around the house. I wasn't really thinking straight. I was still trying to make some sense of it all, you know? Anyway, so this big guy with a crew cut came knocking on the door that morning. He was wearing dark coveralls and mirrored sunglasses. I thought he was with the power company at first, but then I saw he was holding a flower arrangement and a gift bag. He gave me his big smile when I opened the door, and he said, "Sorry to intrude like this, Maria, but they wanted to offer their condolences." I just stared at him like, what the hell is this? You know? I said, "Pardon me? Who are you?" And he handed me the flowers and the gift bag. I said, "What's this? Tell me who you are." But he was already walking away. He got into a cargo van and drove away. And I just stood there and watched him go with my mouth hanging open. And it was so weird, you know? It was just really scary. I was shaking all over.
What was in the bag?
It was my hairbrush. I keep it in the vanity in my bedroom. I had just used it the night before. I didn't even know it was gone.
They came into your bedroom that night as you slept, and they took your hairbrush to send a message. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. It was a message. Look, this is how they do it, all right? This is the kind of thing they do. If I told you they broke into my house and stole my brush, well, you'd think I was crazy, wouldn't you? And that's how they do something like this. They want to intimidate you. It was definitely a message. They wanted me to know they can get rid of me anytime they see fit. Locked doors mean nothing to them. If they ever even suspected I had some evidence against them, they get rid of me in a heartbeat.
It is widely believed that Louis Delacroix witnessed the abduction of Jillian and the imposter. After witnessing this traumatic event, he was somehow able to find his way back to the watchtower. What follows is the last transmission between Louis and Nicholas Fazio in its entirety. It makes for a very disturbing listening experience, and listener discretion is advised.
Nicky, do you copy? Nick!
Lou, what's wrong?
We went out there and, okay, so, we went out there, right? And there's something in the woods, Nicky. And something was coming after us. We all ran, and I lost them in the woods, and I was yelling for them, but anything at all. Like, I couldn't see right. I didn't feel right. Everything was just I don't know. Everything was just completely off.
Where is Matt and Jillian, Lou? Are they with you now?
Never seen anything like it. There are ants to them, and to get out of there, but my compass was spinning in circles. I saw them floating over the treetops. Screaming, Nicky. I saw them screaming in the light.
Calm down, Lou. Listen, we're gonna get you out of there. We're gonna, just tell me again where...
Holy God. They're coming. Look to the southeast, do you see it? It's just gliding over the treetops like... Do you see it?
Hey, what? Louis, what is that? I can see... There's... And now it's changing colors. I lost sight of it. What do you see on your end? What's happening?
They're coming for me. I'm scared, Nicky.
You've got a shotgun in there. Use it if you have to, Lou. Don't think twice about it.
They don't care about no shotgun. Before they get me, I'm telling you right now, I will blow my goddamn head off.
Don't do that. Lou, what the fuck is going on over there?
There's an opening on the side. The fucking thing, it's changing all the time, it's a circle. Then it's like a star. Doesn't stop changing. Oh fuck. It just opened up.
What do you mean? Like a door or something?
No, I don't know. It's not like a door. There's out of the opening. Oh, it hurts to look at. I don't know how. Wait a minute. What's that? Oh shit.
What's going on? Talk to me, Lewis. What do you see?
Something just came out of there. There's more. There's even more of them. Oh my God. Sweet Jesus, the way they move.
Calm down. I called the cops, so help is on the way. Just lay low, okay? Stay away from the...
They know I'm here. They know I'm talking to you.
Can they see you?
They can see everything.
Stay with me, Lou. Don't do anything rash. Just... Lewis! What happened? Lou! Oh my God. Jesus Christ. Lou? Who the hell are you? You're not a cop. I called the cops.
Mr. Fazio? Step away from the radio and come with us. Right now, please. Turn off the...
At this time, there still hasn't been any formal acknowledgement from any authorities at a regional, state, or federal level that would suggest this incident had ever occurred. Maria Fazio continues to strive for the truth behind her husband's murder, and the families of Matthew Golding, Gillian Bridgemore, and Louis Delacroix continue to mourn the mysterious loss of their loved ones. They desperately seek closure, but this has been denied to them again and again by everyone from the chief of police to the governor, all the way up to the Secretary of Defense. The truth will probably never be revealed, but someone, somewhere, knows what happened on that night in August of 2006. It is my hope they will eventually find the courage to come forward with the final pieces of this daunting and sinister puzzle. However, I don't believe it will ever happen. Some secrets are simply far too dangerous to be revealed. I'd like to personally thank you, the listeners, for joining me this evening. I would like to end with a blood-chilling anecdote of my own. Before I began working on this documentary, I was largely skeptical of this story. It sounded like a hybrid between a conspiracy theory and an urban legend. However, shortly before I began production on this documentary, I had an encounter that changed my mind entirely. A man came knocking at my door 2 weeks before production was scheduled to begin. It was a large man with a crew cut, wearing dark coveralls and mirrored sunglasses. When I answered the door, he shoved a cardboard box into my hands, gave me a cryptic smile, and walked away. I yelled, "Hey, come back here!" But he didn't even turn around. He jumped into a white cargo van with darkly tinted windows and drove off, here one moment and gone the next. If I wasn't left standing on my porch with the box in my hands, I would have been tempted to believe it had never happened at all. The encounter was over in a matter of seconds. I wasn't sure if I should even open the box, but I finally gathered enough courage to take a look. There were 2 items inside. One was a copy of the script for this documentary. At this point, I still haven't even made a printed copy for myself. I was chilled to the bone by this discovery. But the other item was even worse. It was a bullet, and my name had been etched into the casing.
Chilling tales for dark nights.